we go ahead and start?
Yep.
All right, I'm going to call the meeting to order. It's February 2nd for 2022 for the regular Board of Education meeting. Francis, can you call the roll, please?
Director Assad Lucas.
Here.
Director Goldstein.
Here.
Director Lockley.
Here.
Director Mitchell.
Here.
Director Potter. Here.
All right, can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Director Assad Lucas.
Aye.
Director Goldstein.
Aye.
Director Lockley.
Aye.
Director Mitchell.
Aye.
Director Potter.
Aye.
All right, now we're going to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Do we have a flag?
We do. I'm sure Jean does.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. I'm going to hand it over to our superintendent for his update.
Thank you, Lori. I thought I might first start with some additional commentary about the announcement we made yesterday to conclude mandatory masking in our system effective Saturday. There have been a lot of folks corresponding with all of us throughout the pandemic about masks. In recent days and following that decision, I've had folks reaching out with some concerns about health and safety risk with that change in practice and policy. And so I just wanted to highlight a few things that Dr. Douglas presented on Monday afternoon that were persuasive to me, and believing that lifting the mask requirement does not place our students and staff in a place of undue risk. One of the things he mentioned, I'll start with, is that at this point, 78% of those within our community are immune to Omicron, either through infection or through vaccination. So we have a really high level of immunity, which they expect to grow stronger in the days ahead. A second data point that was persuasive to me is starting on February 8th, which is one day after this mask order change will have been in place in our classrooms. It goes into place on Saturday. We'll have a few activities, wrestling meets, things of that sort that go on, but it really hits in full force in terms of Monday, February 7th. As of February 8th or 9th, Tri-County predicts that the case rate incidence per 100,000 population will be below 100. And by February 10th, so around next Thursday, they expect case rate incidence to be below 50 cases per 100,000. Those are some of the lowest levels that we've seen throughout the pandemic. And given what Dr. Douglas has shared in terms of the lesser severity of Omicron, that's a very promising development as well. A third piece that he cited is that Tri-County and other public health officials believe that 5 through 11-year-olds have similar levels of protection against Omicron when vaccinated to those who've been recently boosted as adults. So there's been some concern that 5 through 11-year-olds haven't been booster eligible for those choosing to vaccinate. And what he indicates is that recency of vaccination, they believe, has quite a bit to do with protection against Omicron. And so since our students have been vaccinated fairly recently, I believe that the vaccine was authorized on November 8th. They believe that they have similar levels of protection to adults who are vaccinated much earlier in time and have been more recently boosted. And then finally, and perhaps most persuasively, is the experience of Eagle County School District. Eagle County dropped masking on January 18th for the public at large and in their high schools, and on January 24th for other age groups in the schools. And the data they've shown is that they're seeing week over week decreases in COVID infection in their community of 20 to 40% per week. So significant reductions in infection without mandatory masking in place. So that was data that was persuasive, I believe, to Dr. Douglas and to his board. It was persuasive to me as well in terms of the recommendation and ultimately the decision that we made to end the mask mandate in our schools effective on Saturday. We do know that we have some students and faculty who have significant medical issues. And as I noted in the hearing, when I gave some commentary and presented on Monday night, we will go through an individualized accommodation process, much like we do with other students and staff who have significant medical concerns. The analogy I made that night was to students with peanut allergies, where oftentimes accommodative seating is something that's really helpful in minimizing risk to the student in terms of harm. And we believe we'll have many students who choose to voluntarily mask as an ongoing course of behavior, or some who might be willing to do so to support a student with a medical vulnerability. And we'll look forward to starting that process with our families in the next couple of days so that we can have students safely and securely being in school on Monday. Beyond that, not going to be doing a delayed start tomorrow. Some people might be wondering about what the game plan is for tomorrow. There are some districts that are looking for delayed start, but throughout most of the region, and certainly with Adams County, we've all agreed that given what we hear from our maintenance crews in terms of snow removal and in terms of the condition of roadways, we believe that we can operate largely on an on-time schedule tomorrow, with, in some cases, probably some slight delays if side streets and neighborhoods are not well plowed. But we feel like we can move forward with a productive day and a regular schedule. Those are things that I know are top of mind for lots of folks. I'll just leave it with that for tonight. Thank you.
Thanks for the update, Chris. On to Board of Education comments, recognition, awards, and vision. We will start with Amira.
All right, hello. Let's see. It has been a pretty busy couple of weeks. So I was able to attend the Future Forward open house on the 20th, mainly as a parent. So it was really neat. I was at Bowman. My oldest is looking into the teacher cadet program, and then was able to also look at the behavioral science program. And, you know, I always knew how amazing the Future Forward program was, but again, being on this side of it as a parent, there's so many amazing opportunities, you know, college credits, career readiness, all of it. It was just, it's really neat to be able to go and see it from that perspective and see how excited she got. And so, yeah, I definitely would highly recommend, if anyone was not able to go, just to look into it and just see how just an awesome program. So then on the 26th, I was able to have a meeting with Amanda Clayton. And we just talked about the newcomer students, mainly the ones who are arriving here from Afghanistan. And yeah, just, it was really great to hear her background. We have very similar backgrounds. I worked for 3-4 years in DPS and Aurora Public Schools as a school-based therapist for refugee and asylum-seeking students. So definitely have a passion for those kiddos and families. So it was really great to hear the amazing things that Amanda's team's doing, the district's doing. I mean, just a lot of high needs to support. And so, yeah, we're with limited resources making magic happen. So I just want to say thank you to Amanda and her team and everyone else doing their part. Then the 27th, I was able to visit Coronado Elementary and, you know, just see the amazing work they're doing, meeting kids' needs. And especially too with the staff shortage. I mean, I know we kind of hit some walls early January with COVID cases. And so it was kind of an all hands on deck kind of thing. And they did amazing and was able to continue doing the work that was needed to meet the kids, all the students' needs. So it talked about, even though the students' population's declining, or enrollment's declining, which it is everywhere, but just the high needs that's still with some of the students who attend. And then it was really cool. I was just able to sit in a reading group with some of the SSN students. And that was a lot of fun watching them and interact and asking questions and with them. And so it's cool. And then that evening we had our board retreats. And then I was also supposed to attend a GT parent speaker that evening, but unfortunately had to miss it because it was scheduled at the same time as our retreat. Then the 28th, last Friday, I was able to visit Thornton Middle with our DTA president, Dave Lockley. Same thing, we just visited multiple classrooms, had an opportunity to engage with students, understand what they are learning, and just see, some of them are really excited about it. Some of them, aren't so excited about math and other stuff. So it was just really cool. I got to see Lori's daughter, Shannon Goldstein, who was my daughter's teacher very briefly at the beginning of her 8th grade year. So that was fun. But, and then I just got to see, I haven't been in Thornton Middle since December of 2019 due to COVID. It was her band concert, her 7th grade band concert at that time. So it was just fun to be able to connect with some of her educators and see them and catch up. So yeah, and then on Monday, I was able to visit Thornton Elementary with Priscilla as a board member. So it's just kind of fun being in that role since I'm there all the time as a parent. And again, just kind of seeing on the flip side, that we don't necessarily get to see as parents, just a lot of the hard work going in. Talked a lot about the work around literacy. So that was neat. Got to go into both my kids' classrooms. So that was fun. They were not impressed. So I asked my daughter if I could give her a hug, and she sighed and said, I guess. So, but yeah, it was really neat just to, like I said, to be on that other side of it and really kind of understand the literacy aspect and needs and what they're doing with the new curriculum coming up and with the currents that they're working with as well. And then last night I had the DAC orientation with our DAC president, Jack Lackey, Jack Lackey, and our DAC president or vice president, Aaron Lofton. And it's so incredibly helpful and so informative. So I really appreciated their time. And then I just want to do a big shout out to the Adams 12 Counseling Department and specifically to the Rocky Top Middle School Counseling Program for being recognized by the American School Counselor Association with the prestigious RAMP designation. And RAMP is it's recognized ASCA model program. And, so I got my second master's in school counseling 10 years ago now. And so this is a big deal. This really is a huge deal. And some of you know that my husband is a counselor educator, has his PhD and is a counselor educator. And even when I shared this with him, it's a really big deal in the field. And so I'm excited to be able to share this with a bunch of our colleagues that are in the field and who are teaching at universities. So yeah, but that is all I have for tonight. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Director Assad Lucas. Director Lockley.
Just two quick highlights. I know we've got some community waiting to speak and don't want to take up too much time, but I did want to highlight, not this weekend, but the weekend beforehand, I did get the opportunity to stop into the district math counts competition and just want to applaud students who, for no other reason than enjoying it, competing to show off their skills in math, and very much appreciate that. It is our 6th through 8th graders, and lots of students there, including students from our charters. And it was a really great opportunity for them to connect with students of similar interest at other schools and compete. And for some of the students who were in that 6th grade realm, it was their first opportunity to compete, and definitely heard from some students, kind of overwhelmed and whatnot, but very impressive skills being shown off, and excited for our students there. And just wanted to mention, I know we've got other things on the docket in February, but just want to mention that February is National Girls and Women in Sports Month, and highlighting the fact that we have a lot of great athletes in our mix who are always doing amazing things. So shout out to those young women starting to really get engaged in athletics.
Thanks. Vice President Mitchell.
Good evening. I wanted to highlight a couple of things that I participated in. One, of course, was IBS, many hours of IBS, doing more work around ensuring that what's in the contract is what is in practice, and that's all very clear. We worked in Appendix E, where we talk about the tool that would be used if there were staff reductions required, in that, using that appendix, if we didn't have enough staff that attrited naturally. And then we did a little bit around Article 4, around negotiations and how that works, and getting into some areas that we don't get in very often, and we hope we never do, where we can't come to agreement through the primary IDS and story work. And then I also supported the Adams 12 Kid tag up with Learning Services. And of course, that was a very exciting meeting for all the parents in our dyslexia parent support group, when we were announcing that we are going to be adopting a core science of reading based curriculum district-wide for the fall of 2020. And Bo talked about the work that's getting underway to start that planning process, and identifying everything we're going to have to do this spring to get ready for that. And then they were talking about the work that's going to happen around evaluating and selecting that core curriculum that we're going to implement. And some of the literacy programs that are on the short list right now are Benchmark Advanced into Reading in the CKLA curriculum. There's discussion around possibly having some open house with vendors, how they're looking at how parents and the various schools around the district would participate in that. Then they also talked about that there's been training for our 504 coordinators that are new to the district around the dyslexia work. They've been training 504 coordinators, I think, for a couple years now. So this was bringing the new folks up to speed, or anyone who wanted a refresher. They also attended a lead learner training program in St. Vrain, had hosted something way back just before the pandemic lockdown went in. So this was sort of the next, probably something that they wanted to have a couple of years ago to follow on with that, but they're finally starting to be able to get back in person and do some of that work. Heather talked about some of the special ed work they're doing. Again, training more teachers in Orton Gillingham, ensuring people are getting the CDE 45-hour course. And then she talked about, again, very exciting work around the pilot for a grade 4-5 intervention program. And then also, and that one's sort of finishing up, and they thought they might be bringing something to the board in February around that. And then also for grades 6 through 12, they're starting something that they were hoping to have to the board in April. So again, a lot of work going on to shore up some of the materials that we have and ensuring that we really are aligned with science and understanding dyslexia better and helping our staff be able to provide, really high quality intervention and tool sets for our teachers to use with our students. And the next meeting is going to be February 28th. So, and that is all I have tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Laura. Director Potter?
All right, well, I'm going to start off by saying thank you to Chris and our team. I know we've had a lot of things kind of going on this week, and your communication is outstanding, and just the way that you explain things to the community and to us as board members is really kind of a step above normal. And so I really appreciate all that you do to kind of help us understand and answer everyone's questions. I have kind of spent the last week or so out in the community, going to different education groups that are kind of parent-led, being invited into people's homes and just hearing their concerns, and just trying to be a just a person that they can kind of turn to and a vessel to bring some of their concerns and ideas back to our district and have them discussed. I think it's been really interesting. There's been a lot going on in the educational world, both at the local level and above. And so, trying to mitigate and understand what some of the people are feeling has been really special. I can say our district is doing a lot of great things to bridge that gap between the district and the parents. And so part of that is we went to the city council meeting and got to meet the wonderful mayor and city council members as the liaison for Thornton. I think that we have a great opportunity to work closely with them and, kind of see how we can bridge that gap as well. And that is about everything that I've got as an update for this week.
Thank you. So I will just let you know some of the things I've been working on. I did my last dictionary distribution at Arapahoe Ridge, third graders. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the rotary dictionaries, but they're really kind of cool. They have an appendix in the back that has all kinds of trivial things about presidents, states, countries. And they also have this huge word that I don't think anybody in the world can pronounce it, but something I learned from our former board president, Mark Clark. He would say, I'll give you a day off if you can pronounce it. And I give him the same opportunity because I am very certain that nobody's ever going to pronounce it. I got to sub at North Glen High School last week in the ELL program for a teacher that was gone. So that was fun. I got to meet some of our emerging and what's the term? The emerging learners and then the expanding learners. So that was a very pleasant day. I went to Washington, D.C. and I went to the Equity Institute and the Advocacy Institute for the National Association of School Boards. And the opening, they always get such great speakers that are very inspiring. And the opening speaker was a gentleman named Anthony Robles, who is the NCAA wrestling champion in his weight class, which I think is about 125. And the amazing thing about him is that he only has one leg. And he's only ever had one leg. And the guy, we saw video of him wrestling. It's amazing. And he talked about his story of how he got there, because he really came from a really tough situation of home life and worked his way into going to Arizona State and being on the wrestling team and talking about some of his obstacles along the way. We had a couple of breakout sessions, and it was interesting that I went to a breakout session from state of Washington, one of the districts there, and they talked about knowing kids by name, strength, and need. Imagine that. So that was cool. We had Joanna Lohman, an athlete, activist, and author, talking to us at lunch. And she was speaking to the LGBTQ community. We talked about, or we learned to discuss trauma insensitive schools, when the schools are a threat against the students. Think about some of the situations that we get into. I think probably one of the most impactful things was one of the sessions I went to, the first thing they asked you was name people of color that you learned about in history. And it was interesting how few a lot of people could think of in the numbers. And they went through some examples of institutional racism. And one thing that struck me was a book for a elementary primer, K3 type. And it was a story about Harriet Tubman. And it talked about Harriet's life and what it was like for her to be a slave on a plantation. But in the reading, it said, and she had other kids her age to play with, and she was happy. And that struck me a little strange, how you could be happy to be a slave. Then we went on to the advocacy conference, and that's where we talked about the things that we wanted to advocate for at the, technically on the Hill, but we really didn't go to the Hill because the House was in recess. So we actually Zoomed from our conference room at the hotel with almost every delegation, the whole delegation from Colorado. And some of them, the last one was actually yesterday or today, sorry. And we actually got to meet some of the legislators, but we talked a lot with their aides. And some of the big key points that are being advocated for at the federal level are funding IDA, which has never been fully funded in the 40 years that it has existed. And we've talked about this also at the state level, and it would be great if we could do both, fully fund both the state commitment and the national commitment, because then it would leave more money for our school districts to do other things. So that was big. The teacher shortage is a big thing on the national level, and how we can attract and retain teachers. There is a $6 million price tag on something to help encourage people to go into teaching. They're trying to improve the loan forgiveness for teachers. We do have that, but it doesn't work very well. But teachers teachers can rack up a lot of debt, and we all know that they don't make a whole lot of money, and they can be paying their student loans off for 20 years easily, and even more. We also talked about closing the homework gap, which basically is talking about internet access. We are very fortunate. Thank you, Ash, and your team for making it so that in Adams 12, we have a really extensive broadband network for our schools. But there are a lot of places, even like in Eastern Colorado, where kids cannot get internet access where they live because they're so isolated. We talked about using public funds for public schools. And then we also, cybersecurity was a big one. And once again, thank you, Ash, for the fine job that you and your team do keeping our network secure. Some of the things that some of our legislators are working on, Nagus is working on a teacher prep bill and affordable college and textbooks for teacher preparation programs, making it so that you can get more college credit that transfers at the community college. He is also, not really education wise, but working with the Marshall Fire victims. So replacing their social security cards, the passports, and all that kind of stuff. And this morning we talked to Senator Bennett too, and he talked about the fully funding for IDA. And Senator Bennett was the superintendent of DPS, so he totally gets that. The other thing I just want to say is, so I've over the years have seen many of my students go on to do great things. Some of them are even on the screen here. But as a parent, it's really fun to see my kids as adults interact with people that taught them. And so my daughter, Hannah, she's in law school and she's a 2L. So she's in her second year. We ran into one of her old teachers from North Glen High. And I always knew that this teacher was very important to her because she coached her with We the People, which is where they get constitutional questions and they do research and everything. And so they were talking, And Hannah said and this is Victoria Bull, she teaches social studies at Northglenn. She says, "You're the reason I'm in law school." And it really kind of hit Victoria. She goes, "Well, you're the reason I'm a teacher." And it was just really sweet to see that, my other daughter, she gets to run into her former teachers all the time because she works with a lot of them. But it's just neat as a parent to see the relationships and the effects that our teachers have on our kids. So that was really cool. But anyway, that's what I have. And with that, looks like we're going on to public comment.
So Lori, I saw like a liaison report first from DAC. I don't know, and I see Jamie nodding, so maybe there's something for Jamie and Courtney to report.
You're right, sorry. So board liaison report from the DAC. Jamie and Courtney.
Courtney, since it was your first meeting, did you want to share first and then I'll finish up?
For me, it was just really informational, kind of taking it all in. There's so much that, they are kind of responsible of and they're trying to do. I'm really excited to be part of that organization and get my feet wet and meet with them more. So as far as the details and kind of what they're doing, I'll let you explain that, as you've been in that a little bit longer than I have.
Sure. And I am glad to have Courtney there as well. It's been, I'm sure the board gets tired of me saying, but it really has been an amazing experience being the liaison to the DAC group. It is an amazing group of parents, and I couldn't ask for really more committed leadership. Jack and Aaron have been doing a lot of great work to ensure that the work that the DAC is doing is really supporting the needs of the district and our community, and making sure as much community voice as we can. We know that membership in recent years has been a bit of a challenge, and they definitely have been discussing ways to ensure that membership brings in that voice. But at this most recent meeting, they did what sits with me as a bit of a mid-year check-in. And so they really did a presentation for the group to really check in as to what the work has been like through this year, a little bit different than past years, trying something different. They heard from a lot of folks that there wasn't really a whole lot of understanding in the subcommittee structure, what the other subcommittees were doing and kind of what that product of the DAC was. And so they've done a great job this year of really doing a lot of that work across the entire DAC. So all DAC members are getting to be involved in the work of the whole DAC. And it's been a really great experience there. And really being able to share kind of where they've gotten to this point on the work that they wanted to accomplish, and kind of where they see the rest of the year going, and some shifts in the work that they've had to do along the way, but a really great time to check in and make sure everybody's kind of on the same page and knows where the year is heading, is kind of what they did in the first half of the meeting. And the second half really focused on getting some input around the work of connecting to the SAC. So that's a project that's been a multi-year project that the board really tasked them with, knowing that our SACs kind of self-report a wide variety of sustainability and function and membership and involvement. And so the DAC engaging with our SACs gives them a much broader group of folks to engage with and get information from and get community feedback from. But the DAC, being such a high functioning group of community members coming together and accomplish work, is a great place for support to the SACs. So they're really looking at how can they connect with the SACs and how can they provide some resources or support to help our SACs where the SACs have self-identified that they have some needs. So it was a really great meeting. And sadly, given the change in modality for this meeting, we didn't get to meet with them in person, Jack and Aaron, the leadership, as planned, but I very much look forward to them getting to spend time with the board to really converse around forward-looking plans for the group.
Thanks. Yeah, I do too. I enjoyed working with that group. And I was sorry the one thing about the snow days that we didn't get to meet with Jack and Aaron tonight. All right, now public comment.
I understand from Jean Matsuzani that we do not have the folks that signed up for public comment on the call. So I just want to clarify that. We had a Ezra Ekman sign up to speak. Is Ezra, we're not seeing you. And then also Lori Finnegan. Ezra did send an email that I forwarded onto the board this afternoon, just before the meeting. So, but they have not joined us, so we will move on from board comment, public comment, excuse me.
Thank you. All right, board business, board transition support, business services presentation from Molly Brandt and Pat Hamilton.
So as Pat gets ready to jump in here, I'll just give some overview background that as we discussed shortly after the election and our new board members getting seated, we felt like it would be helpful to give the entire board some introduction to the various divisions and departments in the system. There's just often a lot that goes on in my experience as people get onto the board that they weren't aware of. There's people that they'd like to get to know in terms of leading some of the work beyond members of cabinet. And so this is a really useful way in our past experience to introduce people to some of the other layers of the work that go on in the system and know who to reach out to if you have issues, concerns, things that you're wondering about. So with that, business services is going to get us started this week, and Pat, feel free to take it away.
All right, thank you, Chris. So as Chris mentioned, I am joined tonight by Molly Brandt, who's our Executive Director of Business Services, Strategic Engagement. Francis is going to get this going here in just a second. This is our second attempt, as you know, to try to get this information out to you all. So we originally planned to do this on the 19th, and then we had, I think we had a weather situation there as well that pushed us into remote, and we decided to delay this presentation. So happy to do this tonight. So Francis, if you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So this first slide is just an org chart to give you some idea of what the leadership team looks like for business services. We actually have 750 staff members roughly. That fluctuates day to day a little bit. So again, the org chart that you're seeing in front of you just represents the admin team that provides leadership to those 750 staff members. Next slide. So the funding breakdown. Our total general fund adopted budget is $41,366,000. We also have two departments that operate with special revenue funds, nutrition services and base. And then we also have cap reserve. So we're going to talk about all of these in more detail here in the upcoming slides. Next slide, please. So the first slide here, this first department I want to talk about is maintenance and operation. That's really that's the part of the group that keeps our schools operating. And actually we all work to do that, but maintenance and operations are professional trades. So you would have plumbers in this group, electricians, HVAC, our electronic techs, carpenters, and they're really responsible for the preventative maintenance and repairs of our facilities. We also have custodians in this group as well that work for maintenance and operations. So our custodians, they maintain 5.2 million square feet of facilities. And to give you some idea of what that looks like as far as hours of work. So typically our first custodians would arrive 1 to 2 hours before school starts, and our last custodians leave somewhere between 9 and 10 p.m., depending upon the school and what's going on in the school. High school hours are typically even longer because we have so much stuff going on there in the evening. You can see on the slide here that custodians maintain just over 5 million square feet of cleaning. That's tough to do, especially with 180 staff members. As you can also see here that we have 11 open vacancies, and that was as of the first of the year. I think that has not changed drastically in the last couple of weeks. And then just something that you might find of interest here is with the recent snow, is that winter is finally here. So just so you know, we have 24 snowplow trucks, and we will maintain somewhere around 700 acres of grounds. I don't know exactly the number of acres that we maintain of pavement that we actually plow, but it's a lot. Typically, our snowplow crews will start as early as midnight, depending upon the storm. And then we'll have second waves of crews coming in and starting around 3 a.m. Again, kind of depends on the storm and the needs, but we have snow plows and we also have sanding and salting trucks and trucks that do a combination of both. But that's a big organization and a big part of our system. Okay, Francis. So transportation, lots to talk about here as well. You can see it's a pretty significant chunk of our adopted budget, just over $12 million. We have 81 CDL routes, which are commercial driver's license, and that requires a special type of endorsement to drive a school bus. And then we have 7 non-CDL routes. So that's a total of 88 routes. In years past, before we went through our route optimization, we actually had, I think at one point we were up to almost 114 routes. So this past summer, we did some significant work in that space. We have been facing bus driver shortages nationally now for several years, and we knew that this year was going to be exceptionally bad. We were looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 40, we were anticipating 30 to 40 drivers short in order for us, or what we needed to meet our students' needs. So during the summer, we went through a couple of things. One is we did a route optimization and reduction. So we reduced from that up to 114. I think last year, towards the end of the year, we were around 104 routes. We reduced that to 88 routes, which is pretty significant. That helped. But the other thing that we did, which I'm really proud of our transportation team for doing this, is we introduced this non-CDL route program. So we do have quite a few of our routes that can use smaller 15 passenger buses. And so for those 15 passenger buses, you can have a non-CDL driver. They still go through a training course, just like our regular drivers do. It's not as intensive and not as long, but they do go through training. And what that has done is allowed us to cover all 88 routes, and also have some bus drivers that are alternate bus drivers, if you will. So on any given day, we can have 5 to 10 drivers call out sick or call out for different reasons. And so you need to have, in addition to your 88 routes, you've got to have some drivers basically sitting there in the lounge waiting to go, the driver's lounge, waiting to go and waiting to jump onto a route. And we literally give them a route book, and they grab the keys to a bus and they're off to go drive. And those utility drivers, they change their routes daily. They also drive a lot of our midday activities and also evening activities. So we are sitting really well for this school year. I know that it's been a national news story this year in particular, and I think you've heard other neighboring districts talk about not being able to provide routes. Again, through the innovative work that our transportation team has done, we've been able to cover our routes, and this has been a really point of pride for us. So I think we can go next slide. And as you can see on that slide too, it's almost 1.6 million miles that we drive every year. That's a lot.
So Pat,
yes,
I'm gonna
sir.
jump in. If we can keep that transportation slide up there. So I think in terms of the field trip data, there's 2 different data sets, and they have the same school year referenced. Maybe one's a school year, one's a fiscal year. Can you clarify on that? I just think that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm seeing that. Just noticing that now, Chris. So field trips. So I think that was some comparison data that we were originally had up there just to show kind of the number of. So field trips are something that we do during the school day. And I think that I have the fiscal years there. I think it's 18, 19, and then we had a different fiscal year there. So I apologize for that, Chris. And it looks like something that I'll have to clean up, but it still is around 1.6 million miles driven per year. And I apologize for that, having the wrong fiscal year data, but those are typical of our routes. The other thing is, I do think, Chris, that what we're seeing here is, yeah, that's, I'm not sure what that looks like. That's wrong. I apologize, everybody.
Yeah, no worries. I just wanted to make sure that if others might be confused, that we called it out so we can get it corrected and get that data onto folks.
Sure.
2 others that might be helpful to highlight, Pat, is in rough terms, where do we stand in terms of refreshing our fleet? I think in the past, our white fleet and the other fleet, we've talked with the board about maybe a quick overview about that would be helpful. And then roughly speaking, how we stand in terms of propane versus diesel versus other fuel sources, just often a place of interest for board members.
Sure. So we started, this is probably back in 2017 now. There was some DARA grant dollars available, and they've since become available a few more times. And so there was a settlement with Volkswagen, and through that settlement, states were given, and the federal government was given quite a bit of money. Part of that money has been provided to school districts and other municipalities too that are using diesel equipment to convert from diesel into propane equipment. So we have pretty consistently been able to apply and get those DARA grants. We did miss one cycle of that, but we are back into that DARA grant cycle this year and are hopeful that we'll have some sort of notification here in the next 45 days roughly that we're going to get awarded another DARA grant to convert diesel buses into propane buses. So when we started that, we had, and I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but we had several buses, I would say somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 14 buses that were in excess of 20 years old. And so we needed to get those buses off of the road, and the DARA grant provided us that opportunity. And so that's when our propane conversion really started. We've since had an opportunity to purchase another 10 buses that were taking, again, old diesel buses off the road and putting propane buses on the road. So I believe we've had that opportunity at least once, and then we did make a purchase outside of a DARA grant as well, and I think bought another 7 to 10 buses, again, replacing old diesel buses that were really at the end of life. We do look at the cost of a bus, what it costs us to operate that, and that's calculated in a cost per mile calculation. So that cost per mile takes into the account the actual miles per gallon that bus gets, all the maintenance that bus requires. And so as a bus gets older, it will cost us more and more to drive per mile. And that's how we prioritize which buses we're going to get rid of. So that is an ongoing fleet refresh that we are doing. And we're trying to get into a cycle now where we have buses being replaced every 10 years. Brian Batts used to always like to ask me about electric buses. We don't have any full electric EVs yet. They are still, I think they're still really in the development phase, and they're becoming more popular, but the price is sometimes 2.5 times to 3 times what a propane bus costs us. And propane is still pretty much pretty affordable to run our buses right now. So that's the yellow fleet. And then for white fleet, we were on a lease. We had a lease with Enterprise Services for several years, and that was a great thing when we did it back in 2013-14 timeframe. A lot of our white fleet vehicles were really beyond end of life. Again, same kind of equation where you look at your cost per mile, you take that into account and look at as well as the cost of the vehicle and what the vehicle's value is. And there's a certain point where the value is on a decline, the cost to own that vehicle is on an incline, and when that intersects, you want to be trying to get rid of that vehicle. We had lots of vehicles that were well past the intersection. So we went into a lease with Enterprise. It was a way to replace a lot of our white fleet at a time when we didn't have bond dollars available to us or just cash reserves available to us to make a significant cash buy. So this year we have been working on closing out that lease and buying those vehicles out. At this point, a lot of the vehicles were on 60-month leases. So they, at the end of that lease, they still stay into a lease cycle that requires us to pay a management fee for that lease. And there's a fee at that time just to buy that vehicle out. Most of those fees were pretty reasonable. So we have made a couple of different purchases now where we have bought that lease out and we are now free of that lease. And then the next part of that is to start to look again at some of those vehicles that we have that are our oldest vehicles that weren't in that lease purchase that are now well beyond their useful age for us and still have some value on the used car market. So we can sell those, replace those vehicles with new vehicles that we are going to buy. This time it's going to be a cash buy and not lease. So the board took action on that, I believe, last fall, and that's in the works. But as you all know, vehicles take 6 to 9 months to get now. So we are waiting for that for those vehicles to arrive and for us to start replacing some of our, again, really old white fleet vehicles. The other thing that we're replacing with some of that purchase is we have trailers that we use to pull equipment. For example, tractors that we would use to mow lawns and things like that. Some of those trailers are 25 years old. And so at some point, you've got to just say it's not worth maintaining that trailer anymore. It's, at some point you could say that it becomes a safety hazard as well. So we've replaced that equipment. That equipment we have, and it's already in stock, and we're using it now. So that's good news. So we've made significant reinvestment in our yellow fleet and our white fleet, which is a great thing.
And the white fleet, I don't know that we gave a definition, but white fleet's largely the maintenance vehicles that you'll see out and about that are actually painted white with our logo and have carpentry, plumbing, electrical supplies on them to go to schools and make repairs. Also includes a number of security vehicles, sometimes some larger suburban-like vehicles that if you're a golf coach and taking your students to a golf tournament, you might hop in one of those. But those are the things within the white fleet, generally speaking.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Pat.
All right, safety and security. So this is a pretty small but mighty team. We also, so you'll see the adopted budget there. It's just over $2 million. That money is also used for our SRO program. So we've been fortunate in District 12. We've had SROs in full-time SROs in our middle schools and high schools since the late 90s. I think one of the very first SRO partners we had was the City of Thornton and Thornton Police Department. We're proud of the work that we do with our SROs and with our law enforcement agencies. Also in this general fund allocation is the comm center. Our communication center runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It has been in continuous operation now, I believe, for 23 years, nonstop, never missed a day. If you think about 23 years and how many big storms you've had and how many challenges you've had for staff getting to work, we have never missed a day of operation. Part of that is because we monitor our own fire alarms and burglar alarms. So we do have a legal obligation to be there and have people there. We need to have a security guard always on duty that can go and respond to fire alarms and burglar alarms, and you have to have someone monitoring that. So that's part of the reason we also have been in continuous operation, but proud to say that that's a long-standing record, and we're very proud of that, and the people that work there, they're very committed. We are going to talk a little bit later tonight about, in our equity review, about the SRO data tracking project that we've been working on since the fall of 2020. So I'll hold on those comments until that time. But the one other thing I want to talk about for safety and security here. So there's a program that I Love You Guys Foundation uses called the Standard Response Protocol and the Standard Reunification Method. Both those programs, the concepts for those programs were developed by Adams 12. So Standard Response Protocol, we originally called that a response action matrix. And it really took what were these 75 to sometimes 100-page crisis response manuals in schools and classrooms and turned that into about a 14-page document where you have just a handful of types of response that you can have in a school. So it simplified it and it made it much easier to train. And in our opinion, made it it's a much more manageable program. We partnered with I Love You Guys Foundation, and that I Love You Guys Foundation, that's the Keys family. They lost their daughter, Emily, in Platte Canyon High School. I believe that was in 2007. I met John Michael. His sister at the time worked for Broomfield Police Department. She was actually the sergeant serving Adams 12 5-star schools with our SRO program for Broomfield. And we started talking about how we could do things differently. She introduced me to her brother, and the SRP concept was born. Later on, through a grant that we were working on with Adams County Youth Initiative, which is now the Rocky Mountain Partnership, we were working on reunification. And another kind of aha moment for Adams 12 was after doing some reunifications that did not go well early on in my career with Adams 12, we decided there had to be a better way to do this and a different way to do it. And so we came up with our reunification method, which some of you have maybe had the opportunity to go through that. We do a fair amount of school reunifications just because of what's going on in our community. But that then also was turned into the standard response matrix or standard response module, which is used also by the I Love You Guys Foundation. So the significance there is that these programs are used in 2,000 schools across the country, and they were developed right here by Adams 12. So another point of pride for Adams 12. Next
Pat,
slide,
I'm just going to jump in and add a few notes. In terms of SROs, on the money side, you might have interest in knowing how that works. So in Broomfield, the Sabina County of Broomfield pays the entire cost of the SROs deployed in their jurisdiction. That's fairly new in origin. That's been going on for probably 3 years now, I believe. And so we're happy about that, grateful for that support. With Thornton, Westminster, and North Glen, we pay 50%. And so it's a 50-50 shared financial arrangement. We don't have SROs in Federal Heights or in unincorporated Adams County, but have really good partnerships with those departments and can have a quick response from their officers when needed. Just wanted to add that in.
Did you mention Westminster, Chris?
I did. Hopefully that got through, but Westminster, Thornton, and North Glen, I believe, are all the 50-50 arrangement in terms of finances.
Yes, that's correct. Okay, on to utilities. Another one that I wanted to talk about, not super exciting, but it is a big chunk of our budget. And this is one that can have a lot of fluctuation in our budget. And sometimes you might see when we do amended budgets from year to year, depending upon the kind of summer we've had, what we're paying for a decatherm of energy, all those things are factors. So summers, winters, any kind of crisis that occurs in the world really seems to drive the cost of gas and electricity and all of our utilities. So, and then more locally, like water, if we're having a drought year, we might see water prices go up, and we have to respond to that. And we can do that a couple of different ways. One is we can crank down and water less, which is what we're doing a lot more of because water is getting very expensive. Or we can pay the higher prices. And so typically when it comes to watering over the summer, we will try to minimize our watering. And that's why you're going to see more and more of our schools have landscape that's native, that looks a lot like the landscape around STEM Lab. If you were to drive around the northeast side of that building, and also like a Future Forward at Washington Square, right off of Washington there, that's native vegetation. It does take us probably 3 to 5 years to get that vegetation into a spot where it looks like we want it to look. So you do have to water it temporarily, but then once it takes hold, there's not a whole lot of maintenance to do to it. But the first few years, it can look pretty rough. And we realize that, and we're trying to work with our vendors to accelerate that time frame a little bit so it doesn't look as bad or as long. We want to get it to that pretty stage a lot faster, but it is something that we deal with. So those are all things, again, natural disasters, weather, those types of things all drive our utility cost and can increase and decrease it. The other things that we can do now, though, also to start to hedge those costs are to do things like our energy performance contract that we have. So we entered into a guaranteed energy performance contract. And what that does is we take a loan, and we use those loan dollars then to go in and we do a whole audit of our system. And the vendor then tells us, if you replace these items, and in this case, we are doing a lot of LED lighting retrofitting, water efficiency, and some controls on our irrigation systems as well. And what they tell you is that if you will do those things, then you have a guaranteed cost savings of X dollars, which is also then going to offset your annual payment that you would have for your loan that you just took to pay for those utility improvements. And the thing that makes it guaranteed is the Colorado Energy Office is the one who guarantees it. So this program is regulated by the state, and you are guaranteed your savings as projected by the vendor. So we went through a competitive process. We selected McKinstry to come in and do this work for us, and it's going very well. We are super excited about that. One of the other components of this project for us was a solar array on top of STEM. And as you can see in the notes here, that it's offsetting 80% of the building's annual energy use, which is great. We're super excited about that program. So we are doing retrofits to old buildings. We're adding solar arrays, And then the other thing that we're doing is we actually are designing our new buildings to be much more energy efficient. So we use a design standard called CHIPS, and that stands for Collaborative for High Performance Schools. And that is similar to a LEED certification or something like that that you may be more familiar with. But CHIPS has been around now for several years too. So we actually will design to those standards, but we don't typically pay for the actual certification. The certification itself can be upwards of $50,000, and it's a great thing to have, but it's also one of those things where, given the choice, I'd rather spend that $50,000 on more things that actually enhance the building's performance, or maybe a little bit nicer furniture package for students to enjoy or something like that. So again, we design and build to those standards, so we're getting the same benefit. We just don't actually go through the certification process. All right, I think that's good for that one. Construction and facilities design. This is the group that delivers our bond work. At the peak of the bond, we employed 7 project managers. We were roughly half the size of other districts delivering similar sized bonds. We take pride in that as well, but also sometimes it was painful. I won't lie. Our typical summer, we delivered between $40 and $50 million a year. I think at our biggest summer, we were right around $80 million. So that's a lot of work for 7 project managers to deliver. In addition to the project managers, we also have a facilities design team that consists of our director of facilities, 2 facility planners, and an architect, engineer, technician. So that facilities design team, they're really more involved with obviously the front half of the project. So when we're doing the design work, ensuring that our buildings are being built to our ed specs, our education specifications. And what that does is it gives us some equity and uniformity between our buildings. So that is something that we're always looking for when we build new facilities, is to make sure that we are not building, or the buildings that we are building are similar, not only for an equity component, but also from a maintenance standpoint. So if we're using the same types of HVAC systems, the same types of sinks and faucets, it makes it much easier for us to stock those types of parts in our warehouse. So if we do have something that breaks, we can go and get that part, typically have it stocked ourselves, and then go and make that repair much quicker. So there's a lot of benefits there. Another small but mighty team in business services. Next slide. All right, nutrition services. So now we're getting out of those other previous departments were funded by general fund, and now we're going to kind of transition into nutrition and base and talk about our special revenue funds. This said proposed amended revenue budget, because I originally was going to present this to you all on the 19th, and then that evening you were taking action on the amended budget. So now it's just amended revenue budget. So that has actually increased to 16 million, just north of $16 million for the revenue budget for nutrition services. And then the expenditure budget is now at 14 million. So that leaves us a forecasted revenue of $2 million. I think that is in excess of what we originally had budgeted. And there's some factors here that are driving that we're going to talk about in just a minute. So we are allowed to carry up to 3 months of operating costs in reserves. And so as you can see there, that's roughly $4.7 million in Adams 12's case. The revenue itself can be expensed in specific ways, and that's really been driven by, and I would ask Molly to chime in here, but we have CDE requirements as well as, I believe, some national standards too, but it's basically equipment that we can purchase. You can replace existing equipment. You cannot buy new equipment. Those are some of the nuances. We can apply for, I believe, variances that might allow us to purchase new equipment on occasion, but mostly they want you to replace old equipment with new equipment. You cannot use it on people, is my understanding. If that's incorrect, Molly, please correct me. So at the end of this year, we're going to exceed our carryover that we're allowed to carry. So we're going to be at $8.6 million, and we will expect to have an audit finding on that. What we can do in this case, though, is we can save some extra money. So we can start to save money if we have a plan for that money. So we have already responded to the Colorado Department of Education with our plan for those dollars and how we would like to spend that money on equipment replacement and potentially some new equipment purchases as well. So that's kind of the money part of this. As you can see, we're down 11 positions as of mid-December. That's way better than we started the year. When we started the year, almost all of our central office staff that are in the nutrition services program were going out and serving lunch. And I know earlier this week, I know that Molly, who's on this call, was out serving lunches. So it fluctuates, but it is a tale of people not wanting to work, and it creates issues. We have not had to go into a situation like other school districts around us have, where we have an actual just emergency plan in case we only have one person in a kitchen that day, and what are we going to do, and what school staff could we pull into a kitchen to do some sort of emergency preparation. Right now, we've been able to serve and meet those gaps, close those gaps with our central office staff. So what's driving this extra profit of $2 million? So we have we're currently right now, we have free meals that are offered to all students. And so that has increased our meal participation. The USDA has increased our reimbursement rates by 22% this school year, which is a great thing. And then our other two main expenses that we have besides staffing in this situation would be food and salaries. Sorry, food and salaries. Those are our two main expenses. So the problem is I can't hire people. So you can see here I have 11 positions open, and I've had much more than that earlier in the school year. So I can't spend down the expenses that I'd planned to spend, or that budget that I planned to spend on staff. And then the other thing is the food. So due to supply chain issues, we've had disruptions going on all through this school year. And it's not just actually getting the food, but sometimes it's getting the quality of food that we like to serve our students. And to not get too raw chicken meat examples on you, but when Molly started with us, I remember having a conversation with her, and she talked about serving like a whole muscle piece of chicken, which would be similar to what you would get in a restaurant. So it's not compressed chicken. Those are the types of things that we take great pride in. We want our students to have not only a good meal experience, and if you've been to some of our newer kitchens, you'll see that they're having a pretty unique and very cool experience, but we also want them to have a really good high quality meal as well. And with the shortages that we've been experiencing right now in the country, it's been hard to source some of the quality food that we would like to get. So we're forced to go down to a lower quality food, and still good food, but it's not what we typically would like to supply. And as a result, there's money savings there, and that money savings has resulted in additional profit. So Molly, do you want to add anything to that?
I will. Thanks, Pat. Really, I think Pat did a great job explaining the numbers. Can you guys hear me? I just want to make sure because I don't see myself on screen. Okay. Pat did a great job explaining the numbers. I do want you to know we do have a multi-year spending plan in place. It has been sent to CDE in October. We continue to come up with new ways to take that profit and put it towards our students as it relates to their nutrition experience. But I do want to give a little bit of the color commentary that Pat wasn't able to give going through the numbers. So nutrition services at its core operates under the USDA meal program. We operate in 47 kitchens throughout the district. They're full production and service kitchens. And currently we operate breakfast, lunch, snack, and summer meals. At the height of the pandemic, we were also doing things like holiday meals, weekend meals, dinners, etc. And always interested in adding programs as we see a need throughout our space. The key to our reimbursement and our revenue is that it's a per meal reimbursement rate set by the federal government. So as meal participation increases, the more meals we serve, the more reimbursement we get. And typically we reinvest that into higher quality food items, increase staffing, etc., to operate those higher performing schools as it relates to meal volume. I will say that currently we are serving 22,000 meals a day, which is the highest daily rate I've seen outside of some spikes throughout the pandemic. I do believe that that is driven by free meals for all being something that is part of a waiver that the federal government has allowed us to serve under. Speaking of that, I just want to give a little bit of a where are we at as it relates to this school year and next school year and meal service. We are currently operating under many waivers from the USDA to allow free meals for all, increased flexibility, decreased administrative duties that allow us to really invest into our programs. We are waiting to hear if those waivers will be extended into next school year. If they are not, we are looking at a potential for not having free meals for all students and going back to the paid, reduced, free. We are advocating strongly as a state and as a nation that hopefully the best case scenario we hope to see is that the government, after the continuing resolution goes through, we will see waivers start to be extended. Lots of advocacy around that. And I'm hopeful if we are making plans either way, we will kind of create two budgets and we will ensure our students are fed. And I think that is what I wanted to share, Pat. Thanks.
Thank you.
Molly, while you have the floor, can you talk a little bit about the possibility of like a centralized food storage facility and or a centralized kitchen? Might talk a little bit about the decentralized delivery system we have now and some of the costs with that.
Sure, will do. So right now, we, like Chris said, we are decentralized in our production. So we have 47 managers and 47 kitchens that each produce their meals on site. So it's a semi-scratch operation. And we also don't have a centralized warehouse. So our food deliveries come from an outside vendor, site to site to site. Both of those are starting, they have for many years, but they're starting to become higher pain points. For example, right when we hit into the pandemic, we had nowhere to store food because we didn't have a centralized food warehouse. We knew that we needed certain types of food, we needed them quickly. And so we were lucky enough to have our buildings closed, and we used spaces that we converted into storage in our high schools and our middle schools to bring in truckloads of food so that we could serve our community. As we move forward, we are seeing USDA more and more reliant on wanting to push food out in that manner, meaning via truckloads. For example, there's about $3 million in the state of Colorado that we are currently not able to participate in getting those food products in that represent those $3 million because we don't have a truckload ability of delivery, or we can't meet the minimums of a site to site. So that has been something that we're looking forward in the future, proposing. We were working with a consultant for a centralized food warehouse so we can start taking advantage of those bonus buys and to get our students the food they need at the quality they prefer. As it relates to centralized kitchen, we know that it is much more efficient to pull production centrally and then distribute it in a centralized way. So this isn't like TV dinners, not to scare anybody. It is more like producing, the pot pie, the chili, the whatever it might be in a central facility and then taking it out. And we have what would be called finishing kitchens instead of production kitchens. They'd be finishing off the meal with the fresh starch or the fresh items and warming what was made from scratch in our central kitchen. If we want to affect food quality and improve food quality going further, the only real option is to have some sort of centralized facility. And we have included that in our consultant that as issuing a report here probably this week. I hope that answers your question, Chris.
Yep, thanks, Molly.
Molly, I would add, in addition to, you did mention briefly the consultant. So when we started our Blueprint 2032 work, we did hire an outside consultant to come in and do some work for us on looking at our meal volume, getting a very good understanding of what our processes are. And then from that, we will get this report that helps us understand like how big of a kitchen do we need? How much food storage do we need? So that's complicated work, and we're glad to have a consultant helping us with that. I've had 2 meetings with the consultant so far, and looking forward to presenting that work at some point in the future as we start to get more things done around Blueprint 2032.
Thanks.
cool
Laura
stuff.
has a question or comment.
Well, I just had a question around with the free meals for all right now. And you did talk about how many more meals we're serving than we were in the past. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about how that breaks out, maybe by LRA, by the different levels of our schools, and also talk about how that either changes your staffing model or, changes our cost model for how we're doing lunch. Does it make it easier? Just some of those kinds of things. And I know that the free and reduced lunch thing is impacting the fact that we don't really have motivation for a lot of people to fill those out. But that's one of the things that hopefully changing our at-risk profile might help with some of that. But just interested in that.
Absolutely. No, great questions. You're taxing my memory, so I pulled up a spreadsheet. So first I'll talk free meals for all. It has been a wonderful thing for Adams 12. We have increased our per meal volume at most kitchens, except those that saw a decrease in enrollment, which really wasn't related to participation in meals as much as it was enrollment. We see that breakfast is our biggest increase of meals. So we went from about 4,000 meals a day free meals for all to about 7,000 a day currently. So that has been the biggest benefit. We also the reason for that was we increased the number of meal programs since we were able to provide it to all. So that was the main increase, or the main reason for the increase. As far as lunches, it is higher, definitely driven by our high schools and middle schools. Elementary has stayed about the same when it looks at meals. Each school will change, but overall the elementary level is about the same in participation, but the middle and high have increased drastically. And I don't have those numbers broken out in front of me currently, but well, I do actually. They are about right now, middle school, we are serving about 3,300 meals or lunches a day. And in high school, 2,600, which is significantly increased from before. What free meals for all does for our revenue, revenue and staffing model. I'll talk to the 2 reasons that free meals for all benefits us as an operation. One, we get to add more hours to the kitchen because there's more meals to serve. When we do this, we get to really retain some of our great staff. Our staff work hard in these kitchens. When you have more meals, you round out what hours we're able to offer. So, it would be very typical to have the only 8-hour employee, the only full-time benefited employee to be the manager pre-pandemic. But with free meals for all, we've been able to add more benefited employees to each kitchen as it relates to their meal volume. So that has been a really big plus for us, and also retaining our staff. The second thing it does is it provides more revenue. It's the same revenue per plate, but the more meal participation you have, the easier it is to budget and plan for a more rounded meal at a higher cost. So because you can absorb some of those indirect items, some of those fixed costs a lot better when you have a higher meal volume. So it does help us provide a better meal at a higher cost per plate. So yeah, we would love to see free meals stick around. Absolutely love it. And we are doing everything we can to advocate I'm president-elect for Colorado School Nutrition Association, and that association just signed on to please extend the waivers letter to the USDA, and most importantly, the Appropriations Committee, because that's really where that decision lies. And we will be sending Sarah Beleda, our manager of operations, to our legislative action conference for nutrition, very similar to what I heard President Goldstein talk about at the beginning during her remarks, to advocate and maybe not charge the Hill, but Zoom the Hill, to see what we can do in either hopefully federal level, because that then keeps the dollars in Colorado's general fund where they need to be and doesn't shift those dollars around. So we want to advocate at the federal level first.
One of the things that Molly talked about is extending the hours of our nutrition services staff. And the threshold, not only in nutrition, but throughout our system, I believe is 30 hours gets somebody to the place where they'll be benefits eligible. Benefits, the key one being health insurance, where we pay 95% of an individual person's health insurance premium. The costs are quite a bit higher for family coverage, but that is a significant benefit, as you would expect from many folks. And 30 hours, I believe, is when that kicks in. Is that true, Molly?
I believe it's 25 for nutrition.
Oh, even better than I thought. Good deal.
One thing I didn't put on this slide, but I think we should definitely mention that is, we've talked about COVID nearly every week, but this week with some significant changes. But it made me think about, as we're coming up on a pretty significant 2-year anniversary of when this all started. So March 13th was the day in 2020 when we thought we were going to close schools. I think leading to that, we thought we were going to close schools for an extended week for spring break and have 2 weeks of the spring break. Things were developing really rapidly. One of the things that Molly and her team immediately brought up is, well, we have families who rely on us to feed them. And so even missing an extra week of food is really a significant thing. And so on Tuesday, I believe March 17th, we stood up our community feeding program. And that was in service, I believe, pretty much nonstop. We started on March 17th, and I think we went through at least through the end of that calendar year and didn't miss a day. And I think we extended beyond that, but we served, Molly probably has a number in front of her, but I know, or close to it, or has it in her memory, but I believe it was definitely well over 1 million meals that we served to our community during that time frame. And that was a really significant thing to accomplish, and really a big thing to accomplish in such a very, very rapid time, because that Friday the 13th, and literally we had Monday to try to figure it out, and Tuesday we went live. And so that is just the kind of team that Molly has, and that's how she operates. So we're so lucky to have Molly with us. Is it about 1.4 million? Does that sound about right? Am I low?
You're low. We went through August 6th of this year with all of our community meal service. That was what the waivers allowed. We went to the final stretch, and we served well over 2 million meals.
That's awesome. All right.
Great. Anybody else have any comments or questions?
I'll just add, I think it's a huge point of pride for our district and the work that we've done all through COVID was, the acknowledgement and the response for feeding the community. And I know you guys did great things, and I know there's a lot of people who put their heart and soul in that. And we, I think it's really appreciated by everyone in the community, the work that we did. So kudos for that. And thank you for the info on the free meals for all. And, we can continue to try to advocate in places where we get a chance, but thank you.
Yeah, and we did get a chance to mention that on the Hill. And congratulations, Molly, on being appointed president of your organization. And just, the things that you guys do to keep our kids safe, to get them to school, to keep them fed, all that leads to opportunities for them to learn better. So thank you. All right. So anybody else before we go on?
Yeah. Is it okay? I was just gonna say, yeah, thanks for everything you guys do. Especially, I mean, all of it. That the meal service was amazing. Especially for a lot of our Title I schools and our communities. And so thank you so much for that. And then transportation. Yeah, I really appreciate all the work you guys have done. I have to sign the decline every year for the kids with IEPs. I get it, but I really do. I think it's just amazing the hard work the district puts in to make sure that all of our kids have that accessibility who needs it and who may not have transportation themselves readily available, or who students with disabilities with those needs that have, they get to school, they get the education that they deserve. So thank you to your team for everything you do.
All right, so I'll just tell you that I had a few more slides to cover, but we'll wrap this up. But I will say that while Molly's on the phone, her other program that she is directly responsible for is BASE, before and after school enrichment. Just a couple of highlights on that, because I think that one's really important to touch upon. So we have over 400 students on our wait list, and we know that. Oh, Francis, we don't have to go back to the full presentation, but this is another story of staffing shortages. So we have to maintain student to staff ratios of between 12 and 15 students per staff member. And so if we cannot bring in enough staff, we can't bring those 430 students that are on a wait list into our programs. That impacts our forecasted revenue, it impacts our budget expenditures, and our excess profit. So this is another one of those challenging situations where we have been significantly impacted by the big quit, or whatever people are calling it this week. So it's a challenge. We would love to get those 430 students into our BASE programs and recognize that those parents need our help. And we are trying as hard as we can to get people to come into our program and work for us. So I think with that, I will wrap that up. The other thing that Molly also helps with this is our lean. She's running our lean journey for us too, and we can talk about that another time. So I think you all have other stuff to get on to, and I'm happy to answer any other questions as well. And then I'll get the information updated on that slide about transportation. Not sure what happened there, but I'll get that updated and make sure the slide deck is updated in the board meeting minutes.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks, Molly. So the reason we didn't have anybody at public comments because there was a technical snafu, but we did a little communicating behind the scenes, and we are going to insert public comment here. So, Francis.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you so much for the public commenters and their grace in allowing and being able to be here at this time instead. So we have two folks that have signed up for public comment. Just some brief parameters. You will have 3 minutes each per person. Please state your name and the city of residence when you begin your comments. I will be timing you, and at 2.5 minutes, I will raise the hands and let you know if you could please start wrapping up your comments then, and at 3 minutes, and that would be appreciated. So Jean will go ahead and call the first speaker, please.
First public commenter is Lori Finnegan.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Great.
Yes, Lori, we can.
Thanks, Francis. All right. Hi, I'm Lori Finnegan, and I live in Frederick, Colorado. I am a mental health professional and a former district employee. My husband, Ian, is a current teacher in the district. I'm here to respectfully voice my concerns, specifically regarding the decision-making process by district leadership and the school board, leading to lifting the mask mandate in Adams 12 schools. In September 2020, you engaged in a comprehensive, collaborative, and inclusive decision-making process regarding a return to in-person schooling. Superintendent Gadowski shared a detailed presentation that included public health data and data obtained from a survey that solicited the opinions and perspectives of all stakeholders, including staff, students, and parents. This information was utilized by the board in order to ensure their decision met the needs of the communities they serve. In comparison, the current decision-making process regarding the mask mandate appears hasty and underinformed. There are several reasons I believe the board should postpone this decision until the district is able to engage in a collaborative, data-driven process that invites and respects staff, student, and parent feedback. First are a few commitments that are highlighted in the 2022 legislative platform. The first is local control. Regarding responsibility and authority of elected school boards for decisions, the document states that decisions are best made by locally elected school board members whose sole responsibility is the education of the community's children. The Tri-County Health Department serves the broader community. The district must serve the Adams 12 school community. How can you best represent the interests of the communities you serve unless you solicit their opinions? Other districts are continuing their mask mandates despite public health guidance and are engaging in autonomous decision-making processes. I urge the board to exercise your local control and authority now. Other issues highlighted are parental responsibility and involvement and meaningful accountability to students, their parents, and the broader community. This is a perfect opportunity to involve parents and be meaningfully accountable to the Adams 12 community. Second, I am aware that DTEA leadership advocated to district leadership in favor of soliciting staff feedback regarding the issue of the mask mandate prior to the announcement. The decision to ignore this recommendation disregards the relationship between our union and the school district. Another reason is the mental health of staff, students, and the community. Given that we are in the middle of an unprecedented, traumatic, and mass disabling global health crisis, sudden changes and uncertainty should be avoided as much as possible to avoid and prevent unnecessary stress. I encourage you to act on your commitment to trauma-informed practices now. I've tried to avoid sharing my story regarding the outcome of this decision to best represent the importance of the decision-making process, but I would like to do so now. I am a member of the disabled, chronically ill, and immunocompromised population, and I'm at high risk of developing serious health complications from COVID. With the changes to the district mask policy, my family is left with an incredibly difficult choice to make with only 3 business days notice. If we cannot obtain reasonable accommodations under ADA, should we risk our financial security or should we risk our health and safety? I urge you to consider
Your time is completed.
I urge you to consider postponing your decision until the district can engage.
Thank you, Lori. Our next speaker.
Lori, can I
Next.
comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
Lori, I just want to say thank you for taking the time out of your busy day and away from your family to come and express your concerns and your feelings. Please know that us as a board and the staff entirely hear you and appreciate you coming and expressing these feelings to us. So thank you.
Okay, our next speaker, Francis.
Our next speaker is Ezra Ekman.
Good evening. I'd first like to thank the board for all that you do. I know that now more than ever, it's a monumental task. However, I have an urgent request for you all to please reconsider the decision to lift the universal mask requirement in schools. I frankly beg the Adams 12 Board of Education to reconsider this so that I and many others may safely keep our children in school next week. If you would be willing to reconsider this request, please also consider the following data to, as Lori described, help drive the decision going forward. The Tri-County Health website currently states the CDC also recommends universal indoor masking for all teachers, staff, students, and visitors to schools, regardless of vaccination status. I've provided a link to this along with everything else I mentioned tonight in my earlier email to the board. 1 week ago on January 24th, Tri-County Health tweeted, find the latest information about Omicron and how to defend against the spread of COVID-19, get the most recent guidance at, and then a link. The guidelines of that link recommend universally wearing masks indoors, specifically for schools, everyone over the age of 2, no exceptions. On January 20th, Tri-County tweeted, make sure to layer up. Having the correct face covering can greatly improve your defense against the spread of COVID-19, but only if used properly. Make sure to have a well-fitted mask that covers your nose and is made of 2 or more tightly woven fabrics. The lifting of universal masking in schools goes against CDC recommended guidelines for COVID-19 prevention and even contradicts Tri-County Health's recent statements to the public. I called the CDC today, February 2nd, and they stated universal masking in schools remains their recommendation, despite state and school district policies to the contrary. They also said that although they can't set policy, there are no exceptions to the CDC's current recommendation to universally mask in schools above age 2. The CDC's February 2nd Omicron page says the Omicron variant spreads more easily than the original virus that causes COVID-19 and the Delta variant. The CDC expects that anyone with Omicron infection can spread the virus to others, even if they are vaccinated or don't have symptoms. Omicron spreads easier than Delta, but when Delta was dominant, the CDC stated, given new evidence of the B.1.617.2 Delta variant, CDC has updated the guidance for fully vaccinated people. CDC recommends that schools require universal indoor masking for all teachers, staff, students, and visitors to K-12 schools, regardless of vaccination status. The CDC forwarded me a copy of this statement via email today, and I can forward it to the Adams 12 Board of Education if desired. The CDC currently identifies Adams County and Broomfield County, where some Adams 12 schools are, as having the highest level of community transmission, and states everyone in both counties should wear a mask in public indoor settings. There's also a link to that. Pat mentioned an important milestone, 2 years, but we should note that the New York Times reported yesterday that 2 years into the pandemic, the US has a far higher COVID death rate than all other wealthy countries in the world. During the Omicron wave, it nearly is double that of the highest country in the list, next highest country in the list, Germany. The US is behind all other countries but one, Japan, in booster doses, and behind all other countries in being fully vaccinated without exception. Ann Sosin, who studies health equity at Dartmouth, was quoted as saying, "We've normalized a very high death toll in the US. If we want to declare the end of the pandemic right now, what we're doing is normalizing a very high death rate." Delta was different. The CDC stated the war has changed and Delta is almost an entirely different virus. And as
Sir, your
contagious
time has
as
concluded.
chickenpox.
Thank you, Ezra, for taking the time to share your thoughts. Do we have any other public comment?
No, that concludes public comment for this evening.
Okay, thank you. On to the equity work group presentation. Chris, you want to start us off? And welcome,
Actually-
Priscilla.
I'm going to look to Priscilla to give some introduction and get us going.
Great. Good evening, Board of Education and Superintendent Godowski. We appreciate the opportunity to engage with you this evening regarding our equity work. Please know that this is an initial update and that further communication with the board will follow this presentation once Aero Performance Group has finished their analysis and presented us with their findings and their recommendations. That will provide us the opportunity to give you a more comprehensive update, as well as a presentation of our next steps. So the purpose of our time with you tonight is to update you regarding our partnership with Aero Performance Group, our consultants, and the work that we have completed to date. In acknowledging the challenges of a remote presentation as opposed to being in person with all of you as Board of Education members, you can choose to hold your questions and comments to the end of our presentation, or feel free to jump in at any particular time and just unmute yourself. We can't see you while we're presenting, so you'll just have to kind of stop us and feel very comfortable in doing that. I'd like to take an opportunity to introduce the team. You all know me. I'm Priscilla Strawn. It is my honor to serve the district as the Deputy Superintendent. And with me tonight, I have Bo Fobert, who is our Chief Academic Officer, Mila Shepard, our Chief of Human Resources, Pat Hamilton, who you just heard from. He is our Chief of Business Services, Joe Ferdani, our Chief of Communications, Tara Pena, who is one of our executive directors of schools. She supervises our middle schools and 2 of our K-8s. And Marie McKenzie, she is our executive director of curriculum and instruction. We are your core team that meets weekly with Aero Performance, and Phil Spare, our legal counsel. Next slide, please. So it's important for us to really sorry, Francis is catching up with me.
I apologize. I'm having a little bit of technical difficulty. I'll be ready in just a moment.
No problem, Francis. So we'll start with a little bit of just a review and some background. It's really important for us to talk about the fact that our partnership with Aero Performance Group is in working with this equity review is really an extension of our strategic plan, Elevate. Our goal as a school district is to ensure that all students, staff, and family feel a sense of belonging and have access and opportunities that best position them for a successful future. And to ensure these goals come to fruition, we are going through and reviewing our existing data, our current policies and procedures. We're engaging with our community, meaning our families, our staff members, our students, to gain a deeper understanding of their lived experience as members of our community. So we've engaged in policy review, data review, listening sessions, site visits, all through an equity lens. And when I say an equity lens, really what I mean is that we're ensuring that our students, our staff, and our families feel connected to us as a district, that they're connected to their schools, to one another, to our overall work as a district, that they feel seen, heard, and valued. And that these individuals believe and have evidence that their individual and collective experience, their access, and their opportunities to educational and personal experiences contribute to a successful future. So I'm going to pause there and give Francis a chance to get caught up. I think I just finished slide 2, Francis. Okay, so here are the topics that we're going to talk with you about today, and the different areas where we have dug in with Arrow Performance and had them analyze. We've looked at our policies. Actually, Francis, why don't you go one more slide? We've looked at our policies, our procedures, our data. Specifically, we have reviewed 79 policies. We've received over 15,000 responses from surveys from our staff, our students, and our families. We've conducted 21 student listening sessions, 10 staff listening sessions, 5 family listening sessions, 16 site visits, and looked at a multitude of data. And these are the different topics that we're going to talk with you about tonight. Next slide. So we're going to start a little bit with our equity policy review. So with that, we have had Arrow Performance Group review and analyze 51% of our policies. That's 79 out of 154. And so that is policies 1,000 through 8,000. So we looked at our community policies, our administration, business, personnel, students, instruction, our physical plan, meaning our facilities and our grounds, and our internal superintendent policies. And we had them look for evidence and patterns where we could be interpreted as inequitable or non-inclusive. And so with that, each one of the chiefs as members of cabinet are working with their individual departments based on those findings to dig in further and determine what revisions, adjustments, or additions need to be made. And all of that will flow through into our policy council, which Phil Spare leads, and they will consider proposed revisions to ensure that we focus on non-discrimination and ensuring opportunities for students, staff, and stakeholders that, again, set them up for a successful future. Next slide.
Okay, good evening. Can everyone hear me? Thanks, Priscilla. So my name again, Marie McKenzie. I'm going to talk to you about the work that we're leading in our learning services team, just to provide some vision around the work that we lead. Our instructional team has the purpose of supporting schools. You heard earlier, Pat mentioned that there have been work shortages. Our team is the very first team that has stepped up and been in schools to ensure that we keep schools open. So supporting schools in this time of a pandemic has looked different. And also we create the instructional vision alongside our partners. So with our 5-star equity review in partnership with APG, we've had the opportunity to really think about how we're providing inclusive opportunities for our students of color to have access to pathways that really touch on their interest, as well as that provide opportunities for them to have coursework that is in our lane of supporting an honors as well. Just to give some further guidance with regard to common grounding around CTE. CTE courses are designed to connect high school classes to college, industry, certifications, and career pathways. Our AP coursework is our advanced placement, and then our International Baccalaureate, or IB, that serves students in a pathway to be able to look at developing the whole child approach, as well as ensuring students have opportunities to really think broadly about their impact on the world around them. So as you can see in our 5-star equity review, we are showing that our students of color remain steady at having access to these opportunities. As Priscilla stated earlier, we have had a vested interest through our strategic plan Elevate to really lean into how do we expand upon these pathways for students and finding ways for them to see success and reach their full potential. This is work we began before our equity review, and we're proud to say that we have seen improvement in students accessing these programs and these pathways. And so we continue to think and look forward to next steps in working with our district administrative team and principals to really break down and look at this information further level by level. We really see these pathways as needed to be expanded upon also with our PK through 8th grade classes and teachers. We know there's some interest in how do we really tap and engage in our students across our continuum to ensure that we're connecting with them and finding ways to ensure that their interests are represented in the work that we lead. Next slide, please. I talked a little bit about our partnership and our programming. Now I want to step in and talk about our instructional materials. As Priscilla mentioned, APG has had the opportunity to review our policies. Policy 6230 is work that is closely related to our curriculum and instruction team. The purpose of our 6230 superintendent policy is really important because we really value, and it's a pride point for us in Adams 12, to work closely with partners and stakeholders to ensure that we have inclusive approaches for selecting our instructional materials. So in our 6230 process currently, the configuration and makeup of that team consists of 3 principals who collectively represent each school level. We have teachers, parents who collectively also represent each school level, business and community partners, and of course, our student voice is always important to have at the table. So in that 6230 process, the configuration really wants to take the approach to have diverse perspectives at the table as we consider instructional materials. With our APG partners, our next steps are really to revisit and think about how do we continue to expand, ensuring that there is notification and opportunities for our parents, community, and stakeholders to engage. So some potential next steps in this policy work will include ways that we can publish, perhaps through our 5-star forward, publish that we are having these opportunities. Another way that we engage with our community for instructional materials is that we also do have our materials on display for 10 days. We publish that in the Thornton Centennial and also Broomfield publication as well to notify our community and stakeholders that our resources are available. Currently, we're going through a resource adoption for literacy, and through this work and engagement, we have partnership and stakeholder with our groups. We have partnership with CDE. We have partnership with being able to engage with teachers. We've had opportunities to also engage with parents and teachers, administrators, and students as well. So throughout this process, as we onboard a new resource in our literacy space, it's a great opportunity to see our 6230 process up, alive, and thriving. And I've had the great opportunity to also engage with board members here this evening in thinking about how do we really make sure that we are listening to and working closely with our community. Again, that's a pride point for us here at Adams 12, and one of the reasons that I have been serving alongside each of you in this way for the last 17 years. Next slide, please. In our next piece with regard to curriculum and instruction, we just wanted to make sure we also took another opportunity to just do some level setting. Wanted to talk about the difference between curriculum and instruction. Curriculum and standards. So we have an obligation within the district to respond to and create curriculum in response to standards. Standards are developed and established at the state level, and we take those standards and then we utilize them to create our units that really support in developing our scope and sequence and instructional approaches for students. So as you can see here, our why really is centered in our close and important work that we know that it's really important to have knowledge of students at the center of the work we do, and ensuring that students feel included. They see themselves in the curriculum and they see themselves in ways that are making positive contributions. So as you can see here, in addition to standards, there also is work that we need to include with regard to House bills. There was a recent House bill that mandates funding instruction in public schools of history and civil government to include underrepresented communities within our curriculum. So you see reference to that House Bill 191192 here. In our equity review, we talk a lot about how do we continue to engage with teachers in embedding primary resources in our curriculum that are representative of the full scope of American diversity and perspectives. So next slide, please. Again, I want to go back to the heart of our work and our focus and close work within our team to really ensure that we have strong knowledge of students to support our work forward. But again, I want to bring you back to, at times we do have House bills that also provide structure and guidance with how that work might look. In recent House bill legislature, we have House Bill 2013-36, which is requiring us to adopt standards related to Holocaust and genocide studies. And so within this work, once the social studies standards are developed and designed and set by the state, our team in learning services will begin to include these experiences for students in our units. And again, I will say not begin, but continue, because these are values that we hold tight and that we honor in making sure that our students see themselves, they feel represented, and they feel seen and included. And most importantly, our kids feel safe. And they know that we are all wanting to ensure that they are successful and they have pathways that lead them to success. Next slide. I think that's all that I have in the space of curriculum and instruction. More than happy to answer any questions now or towards the end.
Mary, I have a question. You said that we post, some of the resources available for 10 days in the Thornton Centennial and another paper. Do we post them anywhere else, that like the website or anywhere like that?
That's a good question. At this time, what I'm aware of, and like you, I'm new to the team, so Bo might have to chime in. But at this time, we do post it in those two resources. We also inform our teachers through our learning service updates. Bo, are there other places that I'm missing out on?
Good evening, everyone. The 10-day notice that we put out to the public does include notices in all of our local newspapers. So we've got the Northland Thornton Sentinel, Broomfield Enterprise, Westminster Window. When the timing aligns to a 5-star community journal and release, we'll also put it in there for our community. It doesn't always line up the 10 days when we're sending a community memo out. We are always looking for ways to get more of the word out in that space. And I think as we find more opportunities with outreach that we can do through school messenger, we certainly will explore those. Another thing that I'm cognizant of is sometimes just getting to the ESC can be difficult. Many of the resources we look at now have a pretty strong digital component. And so I know our team is interested in exploring with vendors in the future what it might look like to offer a small window for folks to look at digital resources from the comfort of their own home, like we all are tonight, and be able to use a digital form to give feedback in that way. So it's an evolving space where I think we can continue to find ways to increase access and input, whether it's getting the word out to begin with, or providing opportunities that don't require someone to come to the administration building to see those resources.
Thank you so much. I don't know many people that will go to a local newspaper to find information on their school district specific to these materials. And so I think the fact that you guys are willing and able to look at other avenues is really important and kind of keeps that communication open and no surprises on either end. So thank you.
All right. Thanks, Courtney. Thanks, Bo. And Director Potter, sorry.
All right. Thanks, Marie. Okay, so I touched up, Pat, hi again. I touched a little bit on our SRO program, a little bit in my last presentation, and some of the work that we've been doing in that space. So we actually, in the fall of 2020, we started working with our local law enforcement agencies who do provide us SROs to create a program to track contacts with students beyond a reactive interactions. And so those would be those traditional types of reactions that interactions that you think about as far as summons, investigations, those types of things. The reason that we started that work was actually we felt like there's a narrative at the time about that police were only in our schools to write tickets and arrest kids, and we just didn't feel like that was the case. So we started this work throughout the fall of 2020. We worked on creating an MOU that all of our police agencies did help us with. And then during that fall went through some legal review and then eventually getting those MOUs signed. So in 2021, we actually started doing some of that data tracking. And there was a couple of weeks, we had interruptions, obviously, during those time frames because of COVID, but we did get some initial tracking data and we're able to start looking at that. We were also then, this fall, though, we've had a much better sample of that data tracking. So we are tracking those positive and proactive interactions that include things like mentoring and doing class presentations, social welfare, informal counseling, all that positive work that our SROs do, and then also the proactive or the reactive work that they do, which is part of their job as well. And that's part of the reason that they're in our schools. So we've had a much better data collection set this past fall than we did last spring. Our report findings so far are indicating that there are levels of disproportionality in our schools as far as contact being made by SROs. So that's something that we have got to look into deeper. Next slide, please. So next steps for us. One of the things that we learned throughout this process through last spring and then really learned it this fall when we had a larger opportunity, bigger window to do this data collection is that there's some work that we need to do in the space of agreeing on terms. So the things like the mentoring and social welfare, we need to tighten up those definitions with our law enforcement partners and making sure that we're tracking that data the same way. The other thing is to continue to refine those interpretations and in the actual measurement of those interpretations. So we're using different documentation right now. Each police agency is using a little bit different tracking form. So if we can tighten that up, we think the data is going to get better in this space. We also are supporting and have been working with the Attorney General's office as well as Representative Shannon Byrd on creating some legislation that will help us standardize the language and make it mandatory for police to report the positive work that they're doing in our schools too. Again, I want to say that it's all positive work. I really believe in our SRO program and I'm proud of our SRO program, but there's more to the narrative than just writing tickets and arresting kids. That there's a lot of positive work and positive things that they do for our culture and climate in our schools. So I had mentioned earlier that we have had SROs in our schools for since the 90s. And again, just want to reiterate that we're really proud of that partnership and continue to foster that, but also need to look at any kind of disproportionality that we're having with contact with our students. And that's one of the great benefits of this program that we've started working on now, is that that data is there. And so we can mine that data and adjust accordingly. Do you all have any questions for the SRO program? All right, thank you.
Thanks, Pat. And thank you, Francis, for advancing to that next slide. So you'll see that the next few slides have to do with the classified survey that was conducted with our employees. As Priscilla said, the information we're sharing with you tonight is sort of introductory and preliminary. We have another survey out there that our certified staff members participated in with the Johns Hopkins University group. And so we are just in the very earliest stages of actually have a scheduled meeting to see the results of that and to begin to unpack some of that data. So if you're wondering why classified and where are the rest of your employees, they're coming. We're just early in this process. So to give you a little bit of information, though, about the classified survey that was conducted, we really wanted to understand the perspectives of this group of employees with regard to equity. And so we asked a series of questions that centered on these 6 equity areas that you see listed on the slide. I won't read them all to you, but you do see a brief description there. And there were several questions about each one of those areas. So things like, having access to resources and opportunities and feeling included, or feeling valued, or feeling like you have opportunities to use your native language, those sorts of things. We had a good response rate. About 60% of our people responded, about 1,000 of our employees. And the participants were roughly representative of the racial makeup of our classified employee group as a whole. So we feel like we got some good information from this survey. And Francis, if you'll go to the next slide, we'll look at what a high level result looked like. So these 6 question areas had a rating scale, 1 point being a low or a more negative experience, 5 points being a higher or more positive response. And so you can see that just in the aggregate, the green bar at the far right tells you that when all the scale items were combined, the average response was a 3.84 out of that 5-point scale. So definitely more to the positive side in terms of people's experiences and their feeling of value and access in our organization. And then you can sort of break down the 6 different scales in the different color bars. Some are a little more positive than others, none lower than 3.72. So generally positive responses about people's experiences. And then the next slide, Francis. So we spent some time, our next steps include the time we've already begun to spend back in December. A group of senior leaders, supervisors of these classified employee groups. Molly was there, our director of transportation, folks like that. We met and we really dug into the results, the themes that we were seeing occur, and we identified the next 3 bullets as some next steps. We need to dig a little more deeply with some focus groups based on race to understand some of the positive information that we were receiving, as well as some of the negative themes that were appearing through the responses. We also want to do some exploration of language premium compensation, a value for people using their own language in the workplace is already present. For the last 3 or 4 years, we've been compensating employees if they have bilingual Spanish skills and they use them in their daily work. They do receive a
language premium as part of their pay compensation package. So we want to explore that a little bit further, see where that might take us, if there's some value there and need to go there. And then the overall compensation rates for this employee group. Some of the comments that people made by invitation just generally surfaced a theme that related to their feelings that they are perhaps treated with less respect as an employee group, perhaps not as appreciated. And we need to, of course, look at the market rates of pay that are out there this spring and to consider what's happening in the market in the employment sphere, as well as our ability to appreciate the contributions of this really important group of employees. And so those are some things we'll absolutely be exploring more deeply as we go forward through the spring and into next year. So I'm happy to take questions. Director Assad Lucas.
Yeah, thanks, Mila. So just a quick question about the language premium compensation. Would that also, was this feedback you received or part of the data, including paras that might be, or hired as paras, but might be useful in translation services as well with families, like enrolling students, communicating needs with families, so on and so forth. Is that part of that? Would that include that?
Yes, and currently we do compensate. We have a wonderful translation department and team, and so they are hugely helpful in that efficient communication with families. And when it comes to official, IEP meetings and official meetings and enrollment and that sort of thing, absolutely, we use the services of our translation team extensively, and people are compensated accordingly. We hire people specifically as translators, or when they serve, when they're qualified and they do serve extra hours as a translator, they're paid for that. The premium pay for language skills came a few years ago when we recognized that we had, for example, what's happening right now, office staff members, so secretaries, clerks in front offices, in school buildings, who are able to speak the language of their community. And that's just a value add. So that's not like official translation or interpretation, but that is just, we recognize that as an immense value add in terms of just accessibility and inclusiveness for our community. So we have begun to recognize that, and we saw a theme in the comments of that being a way that many of our employees would like to see us expand and continue to recognize the value add that multilingualism brings to our students and to our communities. I hope that answered your question.
It did, yes, thank you.
Director Lockley, I think you have a hand up.
I do. Noticing that achievement is the scale that rated lowest, and some of that feedback, I think, recent kind of national data on employee engagement talks that, yes, compensation is certainly a piece of that, but that isn't necessarily the primary driver around the things I think this achievement scale piece is getting at. And I was curious, knowing that it's preliminary in the work, what other areas you're looking at beyond the compensation that really gets to this feeling of worth, that feeling of contribution to the greater good, being acknowledged and recognized by your peers, getting appropriate feedback, that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. We initiated a 3 or 4 years ago, kind of resurrected an employee recognition program where we take nominations from employee groups across the organization, and we recognize employees as well as volunteers across the organization in a really formal sort of end of the year summative way. And that's one little thing, it's meaningful and important, but we absolutely, all of the reading that I do about workforce engagement and retention, you saw in Pat's presentation alone, the numbers of vacancies that echoes across the system. And it's one thing, to try to find these employees, but keeping good ones is hugely important. And so working with our supervisors to think really critically about meaningful feedback, about timely feedback, about appreciating people. I mean, this is all training and support we can give to our supervisors about how to do a little better or more with those areas, because it's that's so important, and people just knowing that they're appreciated and feeling seen and recognized is critical. So absolutely, there's work to do there. It didn't rise to like a whole bullet where, you know, but it's not without priority that we need to work on. What's the engagement? What's the retention for our good people? Director Mitchell.
And I think my question is sort of related, but one of the things, you know, without having the questions of the survey, it's hard to know what each one of those, you know, it leads up to. But the thing I sort of felt I didn't see in the descriptions was asking about their feelings of, you know, barriers to progression and, you know, higher paying jobs or higher paying positions with, you know, within their track, or movement to other places that might have higher paying jobs, you know. So just trying to understand if they feel like there's barriers both within our system, but also I believe with education and what I see with, you know, tuition reimbursement and those sorts of things and courses, that wondering how they feel about, you know, the certifications I think that are required sometimes in some of those progressions, and how those courses might be available, or, you know, the cost of those courses, the timing of the offering, you know, just trying to find out if there's barriers that keep them from being able to access ways to progress in their career. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Yes.
And consideration for promotions. And
absolutely. So a couple of things I'll say. I've met with the CSEA executive team many times, and we talk a lot about what would help them feel like they could make a better progression. And one of the things that I'm working with Paul Williams on, and with Megan Kane, our Director of Professional Learning, is reinstating more professional learning for our classified employees. I think, if I understand correctly, that many of these really wonderful opportunities were victim of some pretty significant budget cuts a number of years back in you know, the 08-09 recession, and just have struggled to really rebuild a robust professional learning development plan that allows employees to just kind of chart their own course. We have done some work to build career ladders. For example, with the CSEA, we've created some apprentice positions and some entry-level positions in the trades. For example, HVAC technicians are hard to find, plumbers are hard to find, and so there's definitely been the construction of career ladders and pathways that we've engaged in collaboratively. You may or may not know that part of our master agreement with the CSEA is a $1,400 annual tuition reimbursement. And so if they are pursuing coursework, they can be reimbursed up to that amount for their tuition. One of the other things we're doing is we have partnerships with many universities, and we are trying to bring, for example, those courses that have to be taken to qualify as a preschool paraeducator. There are 3 courses, and it's quite a few hours. We're working to bring those courses as close to our employees as we can get them. We'd like to be able to offer them in our conference center, offer them remote or online. So we're working with partner universities we already have some good partnerships, but we're always just trying to bring those closer, easier, more accessible to people so that they can take advantage of a few of those opportunities. And there's more to do. Absolutely.
just want to say, be sure to, you know, highlight that in your your sharing of what we're doing and how we can expand it, or how many people are taking advantage, and that's, just so we know where we are doing good things.
Right. Thank you. Any other questions?
So Francis, if you want to go to the next slide, please.
Good evening. Good evening, board. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening and for the time for us to present. My name is Tara Penny, Executive Director of Middle Schools. So I'm really excited to share with you what I believe is probably one of the most important parts of our equity review process in data collection, and that is the listening sessions. So the listening sessions are an important opportunity for us to hear from our students, our families, and our employees of color. By creating safe and confidential spaces for honest dialogue, we are learning about the lived experiences of each of these stakeholder groups in our efforts to better understand how racism and discrimination may be impacting our students and our district as a whole. So the perspectives and lived experiences that we hear will guide our work to ensure access, opportunities, and a sense of belonging for our students, our families, and our staffs. Next slide, please. So the equity listening sessions have really been broken up into 3 parts, and we've spent time listening in listening sessions to our secondary students, our parent and our family community, as well as employees of color. So first of all, our secondary student listening sessions have included conversations with over 150 grades 6 through 12 students at each comprehensive middle school, high school, and K-8. In addition to the superintendent advisory group. So in all, 21 students listening sessions have been held since December. These groups have included racially diverse representations of students from a wide variety of socioeconomic backgrounds, racial backgrounds, and a wide variety of perspective and lived experiences. Those have been conducted by school executive directors, and we've been going to the school site and collaborating with our school leaders to identify students. And then we're spending about a good hour and a half each time with students, having very meaningful and very impactful conversations. We've also been engaging in parent and family listening sessions. And so we did, before winter break, we did an all-call to all families of color. I think it was somewhere around 18,000 emails that we sent out to families of color in the Adams 12 community, inviting them to participate. We have been able to successfully hold 5 sessions with close to 100 parents participating in a wide variety of languages, sharing their lived experiences. Those sessions have been facilitated by APG, and that was really intentional. We wanted our parents, and you'll see next, our employees, to feel that they had a way to share their lived experience and to be able to show up authentically to that experience in a way that felt confidential and anonymous, and felt like that really supported the process. Lastly, we did listening sessions with our employees of color. We also did an all-call invitation for our employees of color to participate in a listening session. 9 sessions were held in December, 5 sessions were held in January, some as recent as this past Monday, and those 2 have been facilitated by APG. And we also were able to hear from over 100 staff members, administrators, classified, and certified employees within our system. For the purpose of our evening tonight, though, because I've been most actively involved in the student listening sessions, I wanted to talk with you and share some of the trends and patterns that have already begun to emerge from those student listening sessions. So there are 4 trends that have really started to emerge as what I believe will be priority areas of focus for us moving forward. So for the first one, our students overwhelmingly have shared that there is a pervasive use of racial slurs in our schools. Particularly the use of the N-word. We have not had a listening session where students have not brought up the use of the N-word and the impact that that is playing out in our schools. But students have also talked about being called not only the N-word, but they're called beaner, they're called terrorist. They're made fun of for, you smell like curry. lots of assumptions made about the socioeconomic experiences of our students just based on their racial identities. So students spend a lot of time talking about the impacts of these racial slurs. In addition, students spend a lot of time talking about the lack of opportunities to talk about race. Many students are so grateful for the opportunity to engage in the listening session, and most of the time they will say, thank you so much for coming. This is the first time anybody has ever had this type of conversation with us. So thank you so much for coming and for being here. Can you come back? Can I bring my friends next time? Can we invite my white classmates to come and participate in this conversation? But overwhelmingly, students have shared that this was the first time that they've ever had an opportunity to talk about race in a school setting. Secondly, students spend a lot of time talking about lack of representation in instructional materials and lessons. So they'll give examples along the lines of, you know what, we just had, Martin Luther King Day, an observance a few weeks ago. And, teachers do a nice job about maybe playing the I Had a Dream speech or kind of, cycling that through. But there isn't, I don't feel represented in the curriculum and in the lessons that are being taught. And so students talk a lot about that in their lived experience in the classroom. And then the fourth trend that has emerged is a lack of representation of staff of color. And so students will talk about feeling like you can kind of see them processing in their little minds. And we kind of give some opening questions and then they just run with it. The students really are driving the conversation. So these are all trends. We're not kind of feeding the questions. These are trends that are emerging just from really honest dialogue. But they'll talk about lack of representation of staff of color and that they wish they had staff of color because, our staff of color, one, can help us in combating racism because they understand what it feels like. But also it really gives them something to aspire to be. Kids can't be what they cannot see, gives them something to aspire to. And they also, you can see the kids counting in their little heads and they'll say, okay, I've had one Black teacher, or I've never had a Black teacher, or the trusted adult that I do have in the building is an employee of color. And so, students are really, just really reflective on what that representation means for their lived experience in school. So I'm also talking to us tonight about site visits, but before we move us along to site visits, I just wanted to share really 4 impactful quotes from our students that I wrote down, from these listening sessions. And I think hearing directly from the perspectives of our students really does create the urgency of why this work is important. I'm so proud of Adams 12. Just in my networks across the Front Range, there are a lot of districts that have backed away from engaging in meaningful equity work because there's a lot going on in our schools right now, and rightfully so, that taking a time out in this work, Savannah, let's hold please, that taking a time out in this work, is so that we can focus on other things is important. But I'm really proud of Adams 12 for choosing to stay the course, because it really does matter to our students. Our students are so grateful that we're engaging in these conversations. And these are some of the things that they have shared. So we had a student say, if you don't see color, you don't see us. We had a student say, I wish sometimes I could just be white. I feel left out of a lot of things. Most of my friends are white, but I still don't feel like I fully belong. They say us kids have to take responsibility to address racism because our teachers don't know how. And then finally, another really impactful quote was, we deserve more teachers of color. I don't always feel safe telling my white teachers I've experienced racism because I don't think they would understand. And so there's a quote that I refer to often, is that when we know better, we do better. And that's really what this is all about. And so taking the time to better understand the lived experiences of our students, when we know better, then we can begin to do better. And I can tell you time and time again how grateful our students have, just the amount of gratitude that they have expressed for being the opportunity to share their lived experiences. So before we move on to talk about site visits, do we have any questions about the listening sessions?
I just want to say thank you for giving the students that opportunity to have that. That's very important. Being a daughter and of an Arab immigrant, that's and growing up in all white community. Yeah, I'm really grateful that you guys gave those students that opportunity to share their stories, because that's really important. So thank you.
Absolutely. And you know what I can also tell, and I think what's been so impactful too, is that the experiences of our students of color in the North are very different than our experiences of our students in the South. And they'll name that. A really impactful conversation with students at Rocky Top that said, wow, like I feel really seen for the first time to be able to talk with, like, I didn't even know you went here and you went here. Or, other students were like, oh yeah, we know who all the Black kids are. Like, just, when you are in a school where you truly are the minority versus in a school where, we have minority majority student populations, and the struggles are different, but they're very real. And again, the students are just grateful that we're taking the time to listen. So thank you for that feedback, Director. Any other questions about listening sessions? Alrighty, next slide, please. So another really exciting part of our equity review has been the site visits. And so we have throughout, a good part of first semester and some of second semester have conducted 16 site visits across Adams 12, including elementary, middle school, high school, and K-8 campuses. And so the purpose of these site visits are intended to observe the extent of culturally responsive learning environments in Adams 12 with regard to a sense of belonging, relationships, and setting high expectations for our students of color. So we, as part of this process, engage with, so it's facilitated by 2 APG facilitators, and they come alongside school teams, and we break off in teams and we walk classrooms using a digital look for tool. We have an inside the classroom tool and an outside the classroom tool. The outside the classroom tool is really looking like outside of the classroom at the physical environment, the campus, the school grounds, the entryway, access, entrance, those sorts of things. And so the site visit, starts, it's usually about a 3 to a 3.5 hour process. It's a good part of the day. We spend a lot of time collecting data, and most of that time is spent in classrooms. About 2 to 2.5 hours is spent in classrooms. So the site visit really does include an orientation in which the principal is able to share points of pride, share their demographic student data and areas of priority focus. We spend some time calibrating around the look for tool and really just understanding kind of how we're gathering the inference data throughout this process. And then we spend a lot of time debriefing together and identifying trends and patterns for next steps. Some of the really exciting work that's starting to emerge from this is principals that are engaging in this work. At this time, there's no expectation that principals are doing anything or taking any sort of action from the site visits, but try telling that to school principals. They really want to begin to start doing the work because they see how important it is for our students. And so they're already starting to identify what they feel are kind of some meaningful but kind of safer entry points to begin to create more inclusive school communities for their students and their families. And we'll talk about what some of those are here in a minute. But as part of the look for tool, there are 5 indicators that they're looking for. There's cultural responsiveness, connecting with students, classroom environment, instructional materials, student work, and a sense of belonging. And I misspoke. Those are all under the umbrella of cultural responsiveness. Those other 5 indicators, excuse me. So those are the areas of focus that are being captured during the site visits. And then the data utilized will then begin to identify trends and patterns to help inform next steps. So just like with the listening sessions, there are 4 really distinct trends and patterns that have begun to emerge from this work as well. So the first trend is inconsistent use of instructional materials that are visible in the classroom that reflect a student's culture, ethnicity, language, and background. So one of our APG facilitators does a nice job of putting a really heavy question in the room. And he says, when you walk around the building, when you're in classrooms, Do your students of color see themselves represented in this shared lived experience? Am I represented in the artifacts, in the resources, in the lesson, in the content, in the celebration? How am I represented, and what evidence do we have to support that? So that's a lot of where the conversation hinges upon in these site visits. So again, the inconsistent use of instructional materials that are representative of the student's culture, ethnicity, language, and background. The second trend is teacher resources and curriculum are limited in their use of race, diversity, language, and students. And what I love is seeing the correlation between what students are telling us in the listening sessions are really matching up with the data that we're collecting as part of these site visits. And then finally, limited use of classroom resources and artifacts that share student progress and celebrate student growth. And so those are the three trends that have begun to emerge from these site visits. So as far as next steps, next slide, please. So again, many schools have begun to already identify some entry points. They've kind of created, most principals have been communicating out the trends and patterns that began to emerge through the site visits, and they're getting a lot of positive feedback from staff. So one place that I think I've identified, at least the site visits that I've participated in, where principals are feeling some urgency, is in updating all of their signage, especially in the front office, in our secure vestibules, ensuring that it reflects the multiple languages that are served within that school community. And so they're like, that is something I can do right away. I'm going to get with the comms team. I'm going to get with facilities, and we're going to get to work on that. So there's already a lot of energy on how we can ensure that our campuses are more welcoming, a lot of reflection about communication and how we're pushing out information to our families, and ensuring that it's accessible to families in multiple modalities as well as in multiple languages, and then how they celebrate and acknowledge students. And so I can tell you that our schools do a really nice job, with student displays and artwork and awards. Especially our high schools have marquees and videos that have slideshows. But now our school leaders are saying, but it's not enough. We're not intentionally celebrating the diverse communities that we serve. And so how can we leverage celebrations to ensure that our students feel seen, safe, and supported? And so that's, another thing that's starting to emerge, and where principals are really starting to gain some momentum. And so it'll be really interesting to see how we begin to connect the adults, but connect the dots around the student listening sessions, the trends and patterns from the site visits, and then where, our school leaders begin to see some places where they can make impact as well. So thank you for listening about our site visits. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you, Tara.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. I'll be turning it over to Chris and Priscilla.
Thanks, Tara. So part of the process that APG engaged in was talking to me about what values and beliefs I have around equity. I think there were multiple purposes behind that. One is just as they're assessing the state of the state or the state of the school district, knowing what I believe in this position, given that I have influence in the position with staff and community, and I'm often a spokesperson for the district. It was important to know where I stand on this issue. I believe they also felt like in the absence of saying something in writing, there's a lot of ambiguity and probably mixed messages that the community might feel on this topic. And so they encouraged me to put something into writing, which I've done and I think is linked in here. Not going to read through it, but I'll highlight a few parts of it that I think are most important. One is my belief that for a number of years, I've seen districts adopt equity statements and put out a lot of things in writing around the topic of equity. And I've had some reluctance to go in that same spot, not because I am not committed to improving treatment opportunities and outcomes of all of our students, but I often feel that in some districts throughout our country, people feel like writing something is doing the work. Writing something can be part of the work, but in the end, what we want to do is to elevate outcomes for students so that as they leave high school, they have great opportunities to thrive in the workforce, in the military, and college, and to live their very best lives. So I don't want to feel like we've done the work around equity just by writing something. And it feels like there are some school districts where it looks and feels that way to me. A second concern I've had is that oftentimes the statements I've seen in some districts, they feel like they are politically driven and that they carry forward a political agenda. And I feel very strongly that K-12 education is here to serve parents and students throughout the political continuum. And for me, it's not at all driven by a political agenda. It really is about serving students and providing tremendous opportunities through what K-12 education can do. What often people have focused on in this equity statement that I've written, which I think aligns well with what I've said in gatherings of district administrators for years, really throughout my tenure, starting with some of my first comments to administrators in 2009 when I pointed out that our 61.7% district graduation rate and our 51% graduation rate for Hispanic students were not nearly good enough. What I've consistently talked about in those meetings over the last 12 years is the importance of serving all students and elevating outcomes. And so you'll see that referenced in here, along with the theme of how we treat our students and families and the opportunities that we provide to our students. That trifecta of treatment, opportunity, and outcomes is critically important for us to do the right work in serving this community that we have. I guess the final thing maybe a few final remarks I would make about this statement. Priscilla can talk more about what's been done in terms of gathering reaction to it since, and where we might go as a system in moving this from a superintendent statement of equity values to one that's more broadly held by the district and its stakeholders. One on the piece of treatment, you've heard some from Tara tonight about what students have shared about their experience. And in some of the settings I've been a part of, including a couple of discussions with my Superintendent Student Leadership Council, I've been very much bothered to hear how prevalent racial slurs and other slurs have been based upon gender identity, sexual orientation, other characteristics, student to student. I've often heard from the students that our staff are not condoning that kind of behavior. I know there are some students who might perceive that to be true, and you've heard a statement from Tara in that regard. But regardless of what we're doing as adults and what we're messaging in our hallways and in our classrooms and in other parts of our schools, there's quite a bit of treatment of students by other students in ways that are not up to the standards of respect and fair treatment that we would want to have in our system. And so I see a lot of work to do there. In the space of opportunity, I hear often from our students that they feel like in terms of financial resources, what they're able to do at a school like Thornton High School, which is where I think many of you know I attended, has very few resources compared to some other parts of our system, that they believe their opportunities, especially as it relates to extracurriculars and athletics, are much more limited. That's feedback for us to dig into much more thoroughly, along with a lot of other things around resource allocations and opportunities in our system. And then finally, around outcomes, I will say in the space that often what I hear in the social media and other contexts when people talk about equity and outcomes is a belief that there's a motivation in school systems to have all students receive diplomas, all students receive A grades, all students receive awards regardless of effort and investment of personal attention to their studies or other parts of their experience. That's not at all my interest, nor is it, I believe, the interest of others with whom I work in the system on the staff side. I believe we all see that if we really don't provide our students with both high expectations, the right resources and opportunities to get there, and let them earn diplomas and other accolades, that if they just simply move forward with a diploma or credential in hand without the credential or without the level of achievement behind it, they're not going to have the opportunities we wish for them as they head on to college and the workforce. But I very much believe that the outcomes of our students need to be better, can be better. We have gaps between the outcomes of students that shouldn't exist if we're doing more robust support to identify where our students are in their needs and be responsive to those needs. And so I hope that's a message that all take away, that we're not here to have all students have equal and identical outcomes in our system, but given the gaps that we see and the talent and potential that we know that our students have, we can and must have much better outcomes for our students in the years ahead. And I know as a staff, we're committed to providing all of the support, assistance, encouragement, and outstanding instruction to make that happen. So that's where I'm at in terms of my beliefs around equity. I too am happy to answer any questions you might have before I let Priscilla talk further about next steps in that work.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Lori. All right, Priscilla, do you want to run from here?
Sure. So as we thought about the process, as Chris had the opportunity to really talk about his values around equity, we had two of our consultants really engage with 160 of our administrators. That was all of our building principals, our assistant principals, and all of our central office leaders in 16 different sessions over about a 4-week period of time. And really through that engagement, the consultants talked with these administrators about, what thoughts come to mind as you have the opportunity to read the statement. Everyone also had the opportunity to hear Chris talk about this. What does it mean to you? How might you say it differently? How does it affect the current district direction and our values? Are they aligned with what people believe they are or not? And how do you see yourself communicating and helping your staff understand the direction that we're going? Given the fact that equity is an incredibly broad term, we acknowledge that race is really an entry point for us. But given our goals in our strategic plan, Elevate, and knowing our students by their name, strength, and need, we needed to enter in based on our data and begin to learn more about their experiences. And at the same time, learn about the experiences that our staff and our families have as well. Francis, will you go to the next slide, please? So as we think about some of the next steps, we'll go through and we'll look at the feedback from these administrators. We'll look at the overall feedback, the report, and the recommendations from Arrow as a whole. We will begin to engage with different stakeholder groups and develop a very clear and transparent plan of action that will occur over the next several years. But we have to understand the state of the state. We have to fully understand where we are in examining our data and in listening to our community to ensure that the plans that we develop are guided and informed and are transparent. One more slide, please, Francis. So as we think about our overall next steps as a school district, we're going to continue to collaborate with Arrow Performance. We have lots of data that they still need to present us with. We are working with a task force where we are providing some of the information that we have, gaining information, perception, feedback, additional ideas from them. We continue to work with our building principals along these lines. And we'll pay really close attention to what the potential budget impacts might be moving forward on the professional development needs for our administrators, our certified staff, our classified staff, in looking at our instructional materials, our professional development materials, and really thinking about the leadership and the district support as an entire educational community that we need to ensure that the action plans that we develop are inclusive, that people have an opportunity for input, and that these action plans aren't just going to be words, that there's something that can actually be implemented and sustained. We make a commitment to our community that when students graduate from Adams 12, that they're prepared for the next phase of their life, whether that be a 4-year college or university, a 2-year community college, industry certifications, going into the military or directly into the workforce, that they're going to feel positioned well, that they will have the skills and the experiences to go out into the world and feel confident and competent to be able to begin their lives. And part of that commitment is we need to really know and understand our students so that the educational environment that we create for them meets their individual needs. And that means all of our students. So with that, our final slide is really to thank you and to let you know that we are here to answer any questions that you might have or to listen to any comments that you might want to share with us.
Anybody? Well, I'm going to start because I just want to thank those that I haven't thanked during this presentation: Bo, Marie, Tara, Mila, Pat, Joe, and of course, Priscilla. And I'm just looking here on the screen, all of you, just because I remember when we started down this journey, and it really was a couple years ago. And we've come a long ways. And I'm really grateful for all the work that you guys have put into this, because you still have work to do, but celebrating how much you've done to this point is really amazing. So thank you. Anybody else?
You know, I'll just piggyback off Lori and saying thank you. Yeah, for everything you guys have done. This is a lot of work and a lot of work ahead, and you have all made so much progress, and being able to identify what further progress needs to be made is so important for our community. And so, you know, one thing I always say when I'm in my professional life, when doing trainings and educational stuff, is equity is fairness. It's meeting our families, it's meeting our students where they are, based on what they need. And so I think continuing to really do that work is so important. So we're not just giving out diplomas. So we're really are preparing all of our kids, all of the students, to be as successful as anyone else. So thank you.
Director Mitchell?
I really appreciate how much work has been done, and I agree. This is so much engagement and discussions with, across so many stakeholders, and I would say the amount of data that you've already collected is huge. I mean, you've been in data collection, and the work is just beginning, because going through all this data that you now have and trying to figure out, how to put that in some kind of, work plan and addressing it and how you're going to tackle it, I think I think the monumental task is following up and figuring out how to take all that in and figure out a plan to address what you've now got out on the table. Because I think that's where people get frustrated, is when you had all these sessions and I brought you all this, now they're expecting us to do something. So that is, again, not a small thing to put on your plates and your shoulders to go through and do. I know we've got a lot of great people on this team that are going to go through and do that. So I did have just a couple of questions, and some of this is on the career and college planning. I was just wondering, and I'll just say that you don't even have to answer. They're just things that were thoughts in my head as I was going through it. I was wondering why we aren't looking at concurrent enrollment in addition to AP and IB, because I like concurrent enrollment almost better than AP, because kids do the work and they get a grade and they get college credit. And the AP is a score that you get on one day and how good you were feeling that day. It's another one of those, do or die test. And then depending on where you end up, you may or may not be able to really get credit for that work. I think the PTech program might be another place. Maybe you're looking at these. I just, just things that were questioning and rolling around in my mind. And I realized, you're doing a lot. And then I was, I think I saw in the bottom of the chart, the work you're getting into is MTSS and some of those kinds of things, because that was things I was looking at is, the quantifiable data, like, IEPs and read plans and CMAS and SAT, and, what kinds of, how those things all stack up. And I know we look at a lot of that data in our reports, but just, it seems like, and I think we talked about some of this at academics, whether that's scope or not, but I think some of that plays into this. And then I was just wondering if we're looking at our alternative schools at all, and some of the things that are in there. I haven't heard anybody mention some of that and how they're playing out in the plan. So those are all my just ramblings, and like I said, you don't have to respond to all of it tonight. They're just thoughts that were rolling in my head as I was going through and trying to prepare to hear about your work tonight. So thank you.
I appreciate that, Director Mitchell. And I think that as we look at the comprehensive data that we're collecting, that much of that will answer some of the questions that you've posed here today. Knowing that we only had a limited amount of time for you, we really tried to pick, some of the higher level pieces just to begin to update you on where we are in the scope of our work. But we'll make sure that you get these answers as well.
I would just jump in and also recognize and thank y'all for the comprehensiveness of all of this. I appreciate in the line of work that I do that we're looking at budgetary impacts and really thinking about how that work aligns with that and how we continue to accomplish all of the other things that we need to accomplish and still forward this important work. I very much appreciate that we are looking at this as an entry point and knowing that there are lots of other places where equity still needs to be addressed and lots of other student needs that exist. And I would also say that what you're finding and what you're reporting here really resonates, and we're hearing it at the college level as well, and appreciative that as we start to address it, it's really going to better prepare our students as they leave Adams 12 to be successful as they move forward, finding those ways to create connection, to find belonging, and really addressing the varying relationships that our students engage in when we talk about those trusted adults and those mentorships, that those are really critical pieces to student success as they, whether it's a 2 or 4 year school or other things, finding ways to move on to that next step and really have success and retention at that next level.
Well, once again, thank you so much for all this information. We've been sitting in front of our screens for 3 hours now, and probably would be a good idea to take a 10-minute break. Is that enough? 10? Okay. So, Jean, that's what we're going to do. See you guys at 9:04. All right, we're back. On to the review of operating limitations policy, asset protection. And so Chris and Phil.
Yes, thank you for sticking around for the most exciting part of the meeting. The board last discussed this topic, board policy 2.5 asset protection in April of 2021. We now have 2 new board members, so I wanted to put this matter back on the front burner since we just had a report on it during our last meeting. And my main concern is to try to coordinate parts 7 and 8 of the policy better, so we give the board what they want and we eliminate some of the confusion, I'll say, that happens to our administrators when we're trying to decide whether or not we need to apprise the board of something as required under Part 7, or whether we need to get board approval of something under Part 8. And part of the issue is that Part 7 has several exceptions that we don't have to notify the board for. Most notably in the last few years is the part that if it's a bond project, we don't need to apprise the board of individual bond projects because we've kept them informed of the entire bond project this time. Other exceptions include items included in an override plan or items in the general budget. I recall from our last discussion that at least one board member wanted maybe to address the concern about whether we have to apprise the board with more regular and detailed financial reports, which we're perfectly willing to provide, but we haven't done it yet, and we haven't really nailed down the level of detail that this board would want to have. There might be several other things to consider if we do go about making a recommendation to fix parts 7 and 8, and that is a couple issues. Does the board want to keep that $500,000 threshold for notification and or approval? And would that, if it is 500,000 still, is that a one-time purchase only? Or if, for example, we purchase software for a 3-year period and it's $200,000 per year, is that a $200,000 purchase, or is that a $600,000 purchase? So some clarification there might help. One other issue is under Part 7 right now, if something is included in the general budget, that's an exception to the notification requirement. And an example of that would be, or a question that comes up, an example would be, if there's $3 million in the general budget for software purchases, and then does the board want to know what specific software is chosen and actually purchased, or are you fine with just the general budget? So hopefully that gives some food for thought, and I'd like to hear any questions, comments, or discussion among the board.
Well, not to change the subject, but Chris is having a hard time getting back in.
We are working on that.
Okay, do we want to wait till he gets there, or do we want to keep the conversation going?
He indicated that Priscilla could step in his role for this and that he recommended proceeding.
Okay, all right, you're on, Priscilla. Okay, sorry. All right, Ash, what did you want to put something on the table here?
No, I apologize. I was more responding to the prompt about Chris being offline. And so Jean is helping him out. And I'm going to reach out to Jody now to see if we can back up Jean if need be.
Okay.
So, yeah, we're on it.
Okay. All right. Any thoughts on the table here, board, about 7 and 8 on the asset protection policy?
So I can jump in and Owen being the board member, asking for kind of a little bit more regular reporting as it relates to those high dollar purchases. And it really stemmed from perception around bids going to the same vendor or potentially purchases occurring in such a way that it didn't raise to the level of meeting this because it was done kind of in that sequence as Phil referenced, right? Is a 3-year contract the total of the 3-year contract, or is it the cost of the individual years of that contract? And just some level of awareness to say, you know, looking at how our purchasing goes, right? We have a very well thought out and done bid process when it comes to these high dollar pieces, and purchasing team that really holds to that. But just trying to honor that piece of being apprised of where our bids are going and how much money we're really spending with individual vendors or in some of these spaces. You know, it's in the general budget, but lots of things are in the general budget, and you know, things get lost. And is $3 million, you know, a bunch of $100,000 purchases, or is that $3 million to one vendor? And how are we ensuring that there's some accountability and integrity in that purchasing? Not saying that there's not, right? But just there were definitely some questions from community about kind of how that comes to pass. And I don't have any real awareness of who we're truly spending our dollars with, or with what frequency, outside of when it raises to this $500,000 level.
My question.
One idea that was discussed in April of 2021, Jamie, was whether or not to put a certain level of detail into the board policy about what exact financial reports. And I believe the general consensus was we might mention that the board shall be provided with, you know, regular financial reports without getting into a whole lot of detail until we find that right level. Do you recall that as well?
I do. Mimi had specifically mentioned a couple of ways data could be pulled from, like PeopleSoft or wherever that is, but allowing us to work through our typical monitoring process of saying, is that it? How does the board feel about it? And then solidifying it once we've kind of tested that out, felt reasonable.
What would happen if we put in something like in excess of 500,000 for a single acquisition or something to that effect?
That's certainly one idea. I don't know if that answers our example that was mentioned earlier. Is a 3-year contract at 200,000 per year a single purchase, or is it 3 $200,000 purchases? But certainly, if it's the consensus of the board to move in that direction to try to detail that and get some better definitions in there, then I'll go to work with Susie and Chris and others and come back to the board with some specific suggested language, and then you can kick that around.
Right. Well, because I was thinking too, like even something that, you know, to the same contractor, if it exceeds that amount within a certain time frame or something like that. So just for that, you know, if it's going to be 2,000 over a course of 3 years, you know, maybe within a 5-year period, or I don't know, something like that.
Or a single vendor.
Right.
And I think, Lori, to your point about that single vendor piece is what trying to get some reporting, but not a requirement for approval, and reporting, you know, whether it's quarterly or twice annually, not like every time something like this happens and somebody having to monitor, oh, we've like triggered this, you know, $500 million and now we're, you know, tipping in this one direction, but just allowing it to be, we've provided this data. if you have interest in digging into the data a little bit further or have concerns about what the data does, then, having that discussion, but it hopefully doesn't create anything onerous for any of financial staff, because PeopleSoft could potentially just auto-generate over a period of time, or, creating a report once you know what that report is and know what the parameters are, replicating that. Hopefully it'll be pretty simple and doesn't create a lot of extra work for folks. I would say just giving space to that multi-year commitment. Softwares and other things are really expensive, especially when you can get a better deal doing 3-year commitments. And I would say a single year's commitment is where I sit with the dollar limit. I know that, you could be with a CRM, could be spending truly substantial amounts over the course of a contract. And I think I more have concern of that level in a single year.
Multi-year contracts also bring up some issues under Tabor, which we're well aware of, and we always make sure we comply with the law in that regard. But that is usually handled through a non-appropriation clause, which basically says if the board does not appropriate the funds for the next year, then the item is returned or the contract is ended, or by setting aside monies in advance and holding them specifically for the purpose of paying that multi-year contract.
So does it make sense to talk about things like how many competitive RFPs we put out, how many sole source things we go after, and dollar amounts and thresholds on some of that? And I'm not saying that we do that all the time. I'm just saying, as part of the monitoring report, that something along those lines, sort of, there's a threshold, and, just to make sure that we're putting out more, competitive work where we can, and we're not sole sourcing and targeting anybody in particular. Is that?
I would say that level of detail regarding bid amounts and single source exceptions to our regular bidding process, that's contained in district policies about procurement. And we can certainly include, more reports to the board about how that works, or include some statistics in that area to the board in a monitoring report.
I see Susie's down there, and maybe Amira can speak to this too. Is there a level at which the FAC is looking at any of this, either as random sampling or part of the work that they're doing?
At this time, we go through the quarterly financials with the FAC, but no, we do not go down to this level of detail for any dollar amount with them at this point.
Anybody else? Anything else? Well, did we give you something to work on there, Phil?
Yes.
Okay.
And I won't wait 9 months to get it back to you this time. Sorry about that.
Thanks. Thanks, Phil. Welcome back, Chris. All right. On to the resolution designating truancy officers. So I'm going to ask for a motion to adopt the resolution presented, designating district attendance officers and authorizing the attendance officers to represent the district in truancy matters.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, do I read the resolution or do I hand it over for commentary?
It would be up for board, since the resolution is posted in board docs, I don't think it's necessary to read it.
Okay.
But it would be an opportunity for the board to have discussion at this point. Since it is the first time that this has been brought to the board, it could be just for discussion, but could also be for action if you chose. This resolution is something that is pretty standard and is the same as been used over many years. And whenever a truancy officer, whenever the truancy officers change, it's required that the board appoint them. And so we did have one of the truancy officers unfortunately take a position someplace else. And so this is appointing someone in their stead.
Thanks for that clarification. So any comments from other board members? Making Lori Bailey, Michael Casimiro, and Robert Garcia the truancy officers for Adams 12.
I'll just mention that it's a legal requirement too. If we want our truancy officers to be able to represent the district in court, we'll need to take this action.
All right. So then since we made a motion, do we just then go to a vote?
If there's no further discussion, I would recommend calling for the vote.
All right, let's call for the vote, Francis.
Director Assad Lucas,
Aye.
Director Goldstein,
Aye.
Director Lockley,
Aye.
Director Mitchell,
Aye.
Director Potter.
Aye.
All right, on to the next item, proposed proclamation Black History Month. Since we are going to discuss this and decide if we want to move forward, do I read the motion now? Or do we discuss it first and then I make the motion?
It would be better to have discussion first on this since it's not definite that you'll be taking action.
Okay, so the agenda item on the table is to pass a proclamation making February 2022 Black History Month. Well, it is Black History Month, but a proclamation to support it. Discussion. Okay, then do I make the motion and wait for somebody to move first and second it? Or since there's no discussion? Okay, so I would entertain a motion to adopt the proclamation declaring February 2022 as Black History Month at Adams 12 5-star schools as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Any more discussion? All right, let's call the vote on that.
Director Assad Lucas,
Aye.
Director Goldstein,
Aye.
Director Lockley,
Aye.
Director Mitchell,
Aye.
Director Potter.
Aye.
All right, on to the minutes. Entertain a motion to adopt the minutes of the regular board of education meetings for December 1st, 2021, and the special meeting of December 7th, 2021, which is when we met with the legislators.
So moved.
Okay,
I'm sorry, I missed the second.
there were two firsts.
Oh,
Francis was not on mute, and I think you heard both me doing it and then heard it off of Francis' computer. So I think we
Okay,
just have a
Jamie
vote.
has made the first.
I'll second.
Thank you.
thank you.
Any discussion? Okay, call the vote.
Director Assad Lucas,
Aye.
excuse me. Oh, gosh. Director Goldstein,
Aye.
Director Lockley,
Aye.
Director Mitchell,
Aye.
Director Potter.
Aye.
All right, onto the consent agenda. First of all, items D2 and D3. D2 is the personnel action. D3 is the school nurse workforce grant. So do I have a motion to approve agenda items D2 and D3 as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Okay. Call the vote.
Director Assad Lucas,
Aye.
Director Goldstein,
Aye.
Director Lockley,
Aye.
Director Mitchell,
Aye.
Director Potter.
Aye.
All right. On to future agenda items. Our next board meeting is a work study session at 5:30 and then the regular board meeting at 7. And then on the 28th, we have our special board meeting with the DTA, their leaders. So as far as questions go for that meeting, Francis, has Dave reached out to you with those questions, or do I need to follow up? We sort of
No,
talked a little bit about it.
Yeah, you had mentioned that you talked about it with him, but I've not heard anything from him yet.
All right. I'll get with him and tell him we want him by the 16th so that we can discuss them at our meeting. Is that usually the way we do that?
Yes, but we need it before the 16th. It would be nice to have them for the board packet. So
Okay.
I'll send you the date for that.
Okay, I'll follow up with Dave. All right.
I have a question.
Who has a question?
Where do we put the DAC work that we had tonight that we're moving?
Yeah, where are we going to fit that back in? Would it be possible, Francis, to put it in for the work study session next time and bump the board transition support learning services ahead?
You could do like we did tonight. You could move the transition services presentation into the regular meeting and then have the DAC meeting as a work study session beforehand. There is another presentation. We do have a couple of presentations on the 16th already with the ELAP presentation and the long range, the LRPAC. It might make that a little lengthy.
Well, I have a question about the LRPAC. Maybe Pat can answer it. Are they going to be ready to present next time in 2 weeks? Because they haven't really talked about it.
Yes, we do have an agenda that we are putting together, and we'll finalize that. I think we have an agenda meeting Monday, I believe.
Okay.
And don't forget, we see you for an hour tomorrow too, Lori.
Right.
President Goldstein.
I know. Yes, I'll be there.
My suggestion is that, assuming Jack and Aaron are willing and able to work with the board during work study next time, that let's take a closer look at the agenda. I think we may kick the can on this transition presentation and do it another time. Tonight's been kind of a long grind with lots of sit and get from staff to board, and I don't want to replicate that again with lots of presentations next time. So I want to get all that information to you all, but I think Jack and Aaron's dialogue with you is the top priority, and we can do the other stuff at another time if it's going to make it long.
Yeah, it looks like they have some pieces that they're looking for some real board direction that could impact the remainder of this year as well as work for next year. And so as soon as we can kind of consult as a group and then provide that advisement, it's really going to be important to them to be able to finish out this year's work.
I agree.
I'll reach out to them and see if they're available on the 16th.
All right. Anything else? Well, thank you. I know it was a long grind tonight, but it was very productive and a lot of great information was given out. So thank you. If anybody has to drive home, which I very highly doubt, drive safely. And we're adjourned, I guess.